Kanohana-jin found himself on a snowy mountain during a blizzard. He was on an unknown mountain and wished he could wake up. He recalled that his older sister always blamed others under the guise of justice. She once pressured him to eat food he disliked. She claimed their aunt would be sad if he didn't eat. He suggested that she should eat it instead. This was how his sister always was. She guilted him into eating bad food that she herself wouldn't eat. In another memory, he drove her to an event, and she complained impatiently. He told her to have more patience. Since getting his license, she had constantly ordered him to be her driver. After they arrived, he began unloading their things from the car. She then made him carry the heaviest cooler because it had sock in it. As he took the luggage, his sister and her friend left him behind. He preferred being alone anyway. He planned to go to a university far away to be free from her. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and a scream. He was shocked to find himself in a forest. The parking lot where he had been was gone. He realized the car was gone too. He wondered if he was dreaming or camping. He tried his phone, but there was no signal. He found a pretty river and decided to follow it. He walked along the riverbank through the woods. He decided to follow it down a little more. He reached the sea but hadn't encountered anyone. His stomach growled with hunger. He was glad he had a cooler with food and drinks for 4 people. He realized he needed to prepare for the night. He was glad he had brought a cutter and used it to slice branches. He regretted not watching a survival program for tips. He struggled to start a fire with sticks as his hands became sore. Smoke finally appeared, and he successfully started a fire. The fire crackled in the darkness. He felt exhausted and went to sleep hoping it was a dream. Birds woke him up and he realized it was not a dream. The fire was dying, so he quickly added more wood. He decided to walk in the opposite direction to find a city. He reached a cliff and discovered he was on an island. He realized there was no other land in sight. He desperately called out to see if anyone else was there. There was only silence in response. He wondered why this was happening to him. He had only gone along with his sister to a fireworks show he didn't want to see. He remembered he needed to gather more branches to keep the fire going. He found a beautiful waterfall, which was the river's source. He thought it was a beautiful place. He hoped someone might see the smoke from his fire. Realizing he might be there for a long time, he began sawing logs for a shelter. He built a simple wooden frame for a house. He worried about its strength and planned to reinforce it later. After eating his last bento, he knew he had to find food the next day. At night, he heard a sound outside and thought it was a beast. He went to the river and easily caught a fish. He cooked the fish but found it tasteless without any salt. He decided to continue building his house and rationing his drinks. He plastered the walls of his hut with mud. He covered the ceiling with twigs and leaves which made the inside dark. He considered making a window using plastic bags. He also dug a drain and piled up stones as a precaution for rain. He found a rock that could be heated on a fire to make a hot bath. He heated the stones and dropped them into a small pool of water. He enjoyed the hot bath but was getting tired of grilled fish and crabs. As the season changed, the bath started to feel cold. He learned pottery so he could cook stewed dishes for more variety. He looked at his finished stone hut and felt it was a success. Before he knew it, snow began to cover the mountain. While walking in the snow, he saw mushrooms, but decided not to risk eating them. He sat by his fire inside his hut to stay warm. He knew it would soon start snowing heavily where he was. The cold would make it difficult to fish, so he planned to make dried food. He felt hopeless and wondered if he was going to die there all alone. Suddenly, a ball of light flew toward him as a voice apologized. The voice was sorry that he got involved in this situation. It explained he was caught in a hero summoning and was not in his original world. The boy demanded to be returned, but the ball of light said it was impossible. It explained that he was brought to this world just before his death. He wondered if he was now in a world of magic and swords. The light explained it was a god whose power was drained by the summoning. It had to summon living things to save its world from a strange phenomenon. The summoning required 3 people who were about to die. The god apologized for accidentally catching him along with his sister Haruka. The boy was shocked to learn his sister was the summoned hero. Suddenly, several divine beings appeared before him. He was surrounded by a group of gods and goddesses. One of them, a woman, told the ball of light it was too slow. She said they would listen to his wish first. A small puppy-like god named Rich explained the summoning accident was his fault. An old goddess told him to choose a guardian deity from among them. A god named Van explained that they would bestow powers upon him. He could choose skills or items equivalent to his remaining lifespan. The gods introduced themselves and their domains such as fire, water, and earth. They also governed concepts like love, harvest, and order. The boy learned that Rich, the god of ice and darkness, was now mostly powerless. He asked if he could choose all of them as his guardians. An old god named Cattle said his lifespan was insufficient to receive all their powers. Cattle told him to decide what he wanted, and they would grant the necessary abilities. He wished to live comfortably away from his sister and explore the world. He learned his sister Haruka received the powers of domination and all magic. The boy was horrified and wanted no involvement with her. Cattle then offered him a long list of abilities. He chose skills including freedom, separation, and hero killing. He was given a powerful sword and a pouch of magic powder. The powder helped plants grow, and he thanked the gods for their gifts. He then asked if he could take the now powerless puppy god Rich with him. The gods agreed and prepared to send him to a safe and comfortable house. He was transported to a large mansion. Happy to finally live in peace, he marveled at the beautiful scenery surrounding his new home. The mansion was large and the weather was pleasantly warm. He noticed in a reflection that his physical appearance had also been changed. He explored the spacious interior, finding a living room and a kitchen. He discovered a magical food storage that would never run out of supplies. It was filled with rice, meat, vegetables, and many other ingredients. He even found a large tub with fresh live fish swimming in it. Feeling hungry, he decided to take a bath before preparing a meal. He enjoyed the warm bath, feeling happy and relaxed. He used his new appraisal skill to learn how to polish rice. He understood how to use the mansion's water-powered mill. With Rich resting, he began to cook a meal. He prepared a sirloin steak and chopped some cabbage. He seared the steak in a hot pan. The delicious aroma filled the kitchen as he cooked. Soon, the meal of steak and freshly cooked rice was ready. He thanked the gods for the food and took his first bite. He savored the delicious meal, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction. He sat at the table and finally accepted that he had survived. At night, he lay in a comfortable bed, safe and secure. He felt ready to begin his new life in this unknown world. However, he was so unused to comfort that he found it hard to fall asleep. Konohana-jin had been in the new world for several weeks. He was now accustomed to his new life and his body felt healthy again. Using his appraisal skill, he could identify ingredients and know how to cook them. He decided to make ramen, but realized he lacked some of the necessary ingredients. He enjoyed a simple meal of fish and rice instead. The gods had given him a map and money, so he decided to go shopping. He studied the map to find a suitable town to visit. He found a recommended place and decided to go there. Using his transition skill, he teleported to the frontier city of Kanam. Kanam was known for being near a forest full of monsters. He felt out of place and decided to buy some local clothes to blend in. He bought a simple hooded cloak and other garments. The money the gods gave him was a substantial amount in this world's currency. He also found a shop selling expensive potions. He noticed a food stall, but his appraisal skill warned him it was unsanitary. He bought some farming tools, and a woman gave him a grape twig for free. The woman directed him to a weapon shop for armor and a sword. He found the shop amazed at the selection of weapons. He chose a sword and bought some leather armor and other gear. It was late, so he found an inn to stay at for the night. The next day, he went to the Adventurers Guild to register. He paid the registration fee and asked for information about the local monsters. He learned that the monsters in the nearby forest were possessed by evil spirits. A man named Dean introduced himself as an instructor for new adventurers. The boy introduced himself as Jean, and Dean noted their similar names. Dean was arguing with a girl who was upset he was refusing a request from a noble. The girl, Emil, was his sister, and another adventurer, Kina, intervened. The receptionist apologized for the scene and explained Dean's situation. Jean, uncomfortable with the sibling drama, withdrew his request for an escort. He asked for the adventurer's manual instead, and the receptionist agreed. As he left, the goddess Emto appeared visible only to him. She explained that he could communicate with her telepathically. She warned him that using his separation skill too broadly would weaken it. She advised him to use it on single targets for the best effect. He thanked her for the advice, and she disappeared. He went to the demon forest, reading the manual on the way. The manual described the weak hornless monsters found at the forest entrance. He decided to test his new all-kill blade on them. An ordinary rabbit appeared and hopped away. Then a hornless rabbit with tiny horns and dark eyes charged at him. He swung his sword and defeated it in a single strike. He was surprised at how easily he had won. He then used a normal sword and still defeated a horned rabbit just as easily. He found the forest was full of edible plants and useful herbs. He discovered some mushrooms that he recognized from the island. He sensed a large monster nearby. He turned to see a large horned bear growling at him. He realized he was facing a much more dangerous monster. After defeating the horned bear, the boy stood over its body. Emto appeared and asked why he didn't use magic. He had forgotten about his magic abilities and wanted to test them. Emto suggested he use his search skill to find a monster. He used search and immediately located a rabbit monster. Emto explained that he possessed attributes from all the gods. He focused and cast a wind-slash spell. The spell successfully defeated the rabbit. She told him to use his magic with care as it was a rare ability. He used his magic to transport the dead monsters closer to the city gate. He then had to figure out how to carry the large bear carcass to the guild. He arrived at the trade guild and asked a man to assess his haul. The man was shocked to see the massive, cleanly butchered bear. The boy explained that his new mental fortitude skill helped him handle the gruesome task. The man was impressed and offered a good price for the bear pelt. The boy asked about a place to learn potion making to avoid the Adventurers Guild. The man directed him to the Doctors Guild next door. He went to the Doctors Guild and purchased several potion recipes. He found the recipes easy to understand. The trader from next door called him over to show him a magic stone. The stone, a red spinel, was a rare drop from the bear's corpse. The trader offered to trade for it, and the boy agreed. Afterwards, he explored the city's market. He saw many food stalls selling various breads and sandwiches. He bought a grilled sausage and found it a bit greasy. He also tried some dried fruits which were surprisingly sour. He noticed a stall selling brown sugar by weight. He then saw a crowd gathered around a stall selling roast pig. A whole roasted pig was on display and it smelled delicious. He bought a roast pork sandwich and enjoyed it immensely. He returned home to his mansion feeling satisfied with his day. He had made money and learned about his new abilities. He noticed that Rich's presence was growing fainter. He hoped the puppy god would get better soon. The next day, he decided to visit the royal capital to find better quality goods. The capital was a huge, impressive city built on multiple levels. At the city gate, he asked a guard for a map or a guide. The guard suggested he hire a kid named Leon in the city square. The boy thanked the guard and headed into the city. He found the square and saw a boy with ash blue hair sitting by a well. He approached and asked if he was Leon. Leon glared at him with a hostile expression. He confirmed he was Leon and rudely asked what he wanted. Jean was intimidated by Leon's scary glare. Leon, who was actually Elara, agreed to guide him around the city. They mentioned the view from the stronghold, but civilians couldn't enter. Jean asked for clothing or dining recommendations instead. Elara became annoyed, but suggested a famous clothing shop. Jean wondered why Elara made such a scary face. He learned that houses were built close together due to land and road taxes. They visited a place called the Bow of Spirits, which had a beautiful courtyard fountain. Elara apologized for suggesting a place he might not appreciate. Suddenly, a butler named Note appeared calling Elara young miss. Note was the Alderhade family's butler, and he warned that someone was after Elara. Another person, a woman named Lilith, arrived to help them escape. Lilith knocked Lara unconscious for a strategic retreat. The butler Note worried that young miss was hurt. Jean was confused by the unfolding events. He offered Lilith a healing potion for Lara's injury. Note was surprised they were heading to Tame's shop. Lilith accepted Jean's offer for a ride on her horse. The potion quickly healed Lara's head. Lilith and Note thanked Jean for his help. Lara woke up inside a wagon, unsure of where she was. Lilith explained that Elara's younger brother was trying to have her eliminated. Jean was again caught in the middle of sibling drama. They arrived at a clothing shop belonging to a man named Tame. Elara apologized to Jean for the unfinished tour. Lilith introduced herself and gave Jean a ring as thanks for his help. She then revealed that Leon was actually a girl named Laura Alderhade. They asked Jean to keep the incident a secret, offering remuneration. He discovered the shop was a bespoke tailor with no ready-made clothes. Feeling tired, Jean left and bought fabric and books elsewhere. He returned to his mansion to eat and read. He placed a bowl of water for Rich before settling down. He found it too dark to read by candlelight and made a rapeseed oil lamp. Remembering Miss Toe's advice, he used his magic to create a ball of light. The light was bright and convenient. He reflected on the day's events, thinking Lara was an upstanding person. He didn't know what happened to her, but prayed for her safety. Just then, Rich began to wake up. Rich woke up and autumn arrived. He had recovered considerably over the past few months. Jean had been busy learning carpentry and cheesemaking. He planned to build more sheds before winter came. He planted a cork oak seedling and used growth powder on it. The seedling instantly grew into a large, mature tree. He decided to go to Canum for shopping and to deliver game in town. He dropped off a handkerchief and noticed Amel was there again. Amel had been following him since he started trading at the guild. He decided to rent a house to make his shopping seem less strange. A man showed him a cheap, newly built property. He learned that in this world, older, improved houses were considered better. He decided to take the house and fix it up himself. Amel was still watching him from a distance. As it grew colder, Amel worried about not having enough money. Jean approached and asked if she was okay. She warned him that the demon forest was more dangerous when it was cold. He tried to avoid her concern, but she tripped while trying to stop him. He was confused why she wasn't discouraged. Dean appeared and apologized for his sister. Kina was being scolded at the guild because a skilled adventurer was taken by the trade guild. Dean said it was his fault for what happened with Gon and his sister. Jean agreed to visit the Adventurers Guild to clear things up. His only condition was that Amel stay away from him. Dean insisted his sister was cute, but Jean found her creepy. Jean said she wasn't his type at all. He described his type as the opposite of his sister, thinking of Ash. As an apology, Dean offered to show him where a rare plant grew. Jean agreed, thinking he was normal aside from his sister complex. Dean showed him the kinka herb used to flavor alcohol for the rich. They decided to hunt a rabbit for lunch. They roasted rabbit skewers over a fire. Dean was impressed with Jean's efficient fighting style. Jean felt he relied too much on brute strength and resolved to grow more. Dean suddenly fell to the ground. Ash appeared from behind the trees. Both Jean and Dean were surprised to see her. Jean recognized her as LRA, but she was in the woods for a different reason. Ash said she was there to hunt a bear and draw water. She introduced herself to Dean. Dean offered Ash some roasted rabbit. Ash explained that the inn fees were steep. Jean was shocked to learn Ash was paying a gold coin per day. Ash revealed that a pink-haired receptionist at the guild had recommended the inn. The group realized that AML had tricked Ash into staying at an expensive inn. Dean defended his sister, saying the inn was at fault. Ash looked at Jean's annoyed face. Ash told Dean that there was a spirit beside his sister. Ash also pointed out a mark floating above Dean's head. Jean could see the mark, which was unusual for spirits. A flower suddenly sprouted from Dean's head. Jean tried not to laugh at the sight. He plucked the flower from Dean's head. Dean immediately lost consciousness. Ash explained it was a form of mental domination that was suddenly cut off. Jean could only see Rich, but Ash's family could see spirits. Ash warned that his ability to touch spirits would be coveted. They decided to deal with the unconscious Dean. Jean was concerned about his ability being discovered. They both thought about leaving Dean to a bear. Ash resigned to the situation, feeling it was an error in judgment. Ash then asked Jean if he could see the spirit that followed them. The bird spirit was pecking Ash's head relentlessly. A bird spirit named Rue was pecking at Ash's head, causing a dull pain. Jean noticed a band of light around the spirit's neck like a collar. His appraisal revealed the spirit was tasked with making LRA more manly. Ash explained her father attached the spirit after having a younger son with another woman. Since their country allows female successors, her father wanted her trained like a male for their military family. Jean found the idea of being more manly strange. He suggested releasing the spirit, and Ash asked if he could do it. She agreed to let him try when they returned to town. Dean woke up realizing he had been influenced by an evil spirit. He decided to take AML to the Bower of Spirits to be cleansed. Jean learned that each city has its own Bower of Spirits for approaching or casting out spirits. Dean arranged for a conveyor to help transport the game they hunted. He thanked them and promised to keep their abilities a secret. As they waited, they were surrounded by a pack of wolves. Ash swiftly killed one with her sword. Jean was impressed by her efficient movements. He thought that he only mimicked his skills, unlike Ash's powerful sword use. The conveyor arrived, but the cart strained under the weight of all the wolves they had killed. They loaded the wolves onto the cart anyway. Since Ash couldn't stay at the inn, Jean offered his house in Kanam. Her butler had gone ahead to the city on his own. Jean welcomed Ash into his newly repaired rental house. He offered her a hot bath since she smelled of the wolves she carried. He prepared the bath in a large tub by the fireplace. He then went upstairs to change and prepare a guest bed. After changing, they sat down to begin removing the spirit's collar. The bird continued to peck at Ash's head. Jean reached out to touch the collar of light around the bird's neck. The collar snapped, and Ash immediately collapsed into his arms. He was surprised by the sudden event. He carried her to bed and told the freed bird to rest. He was glad the process had been easier than expected. He decided to furnish the rest of the house while she was asleep. He went out to buy furniture and supplies. Back at his main residence, he apologized to Rich for being away. He knew Ash wouldn't wake up anytime soon. Suddenly, Miss Toe and the other gods appeared in his room. They apologized for the intrusion but had a request. Miss Toto explained that Jean's sister was recklessly using a large amount of magic. She was absorbing the power of smaller spirits, causing them to disappear. The god Namina had warned her, but she was not listening. The other spirits were noisy and bothering the gods. Pal explained that if the situation continued, it would have a wide impact. Miss Toad told him to look outside the window. He looked and saw countless small spirits packed outside his house. They had gathered near him because his liberation ability protected them from his sister's domination. The gods suggested he give the spirits names to form a bond and protect them further. This would allow them to scatter freely without being dominated. They told him any name would do, even numbers. He reluctantly agreed and spent the next 2 hours naming spirits like Red 1 and Yellow 52. Feeling tired, he took a break to check on Ash's condition. He used transition to return to the house in Kanum. Emto had followed him and asked who Ash was. He explained that Ash was the person he had just saved. He had freed her from the spirit that was bound to her. Emto looked at the sleeping Ash and declared it was a maiden's crisis. So Emto starts going on about some maiden's crisis, while Ash is totally passed out and Jean is just like, what? He swears he's not up to anything sketchy, but Miss Toe just tells him to chill, it's all good. Then it clicks, she was just talking about Ash not needing the bathroom. Jean, trying to change the subject, asks for the bird's name, even though he'd already peeped it was Rue with his appraisal skill. Miss Toe started to explain. Apparently the bird's contract was totally busted, so it was free for a rebrand. The little guy actually wanted Jean to pick a new name. Jean suggested Azu, and the bird was super into it. He then told Azu to watch over Ash while she slept. When they got back to the mansion, Cattle and Ish were waiting. Jean laid down the law, saying he'd be handling all spirit naming from now on. Then whoops, he accidentally let off a flash of light so bright it was insane. The spirits had to explain that he needed to be way more specific when slinging magic. Jean finally got it. He had to actually picture what he wanted to happen, not just yell a word. So he asked the spirits what they wanted for dinner, and they started listing stuff like salt, bread, honey, and wine. While they all ate, Jean kicked back with a bowl of buturu soup. The whole scene with the spirits eating was totally surreal. Like Ish was literally just eating plain salt off a spoon. Ish told him his older brother was stressing about his health. Miss Toe explained that human-looking spirits can eat actual food, unlike the others whose diets are all based on their specific attributes. Jean called for Rich to come get some food. Rudell immediately accused Rich of being a schemer, calling him a wolf of the darkness of ice. Emto found this hilarious, since they used to be too scared to even go near Rich. The spirits admitted they were still a little sketched out by Rich because of his past. Rich then just casually revealed he used to be a destructive alpha who took out anyone who crossed him. This got them all talking about his whole spirit wolf identity. Cattle warned Jean that Rich used to be crazy smart and could even talk. Miss Toe playfully called Jean her honey, which he thought was sending majorly mixed signals. The spirits thanked him for the food, and then bounced for the night. Jean got a kick out of seeing the supposedly solitary wolf Rich just playing on the floor. After that, he headed to a pottery town to order a custom tub, making a mental note to get new dishes later. He introduced himself to the potter Malcolm and pitched his idea. Malcolm mentioned that some noble from the next country over also wanted a clawfoot bathtub. Jean offered to help with the design, and Malcolm was totally on board. For a second, Jean got this weird vibe like he was getting tangled up with his sister again. Later, he got back to an inn and found Leon Ash completely passed out on the floor. He helped them up to a room. Leon Ash thanked him for the save, saying they'd been asleep for 3 whole days and felt super stiff. Jean apologized and explained he'd renamed the bird Azu while they were out. Ash asked what name he'd picked. Ash thought Azu was a pretty cool name and said if the spirit liked it, that meant it liked Jean too. Jean couldn't help but notice how incredibly good-looking Ash's face was without a frown. Ash was a handsome guy, definitely not a girl. Jean gave him a heads up not to get tricked into anyone's bed, assuring Ash that he was safe with him. Jean offered to let Ash crash at his place to recover. Ash apologized, but Jean just said he should focus on getting better so he could get back the rent money he was scammed out of. Ash, being super honest, insisted on paying rent for staying. They all headed to a pub where Ash's butler Note was waiting with another guy named Dean. Note introduced himself as a former butler, who was now an adventurer. The group started talking about the whole situation with Dean's sister Amel. Dean explained that Amel got sent to the Bower of Spirits to get her spirit yeeted. She had to basically start over at the guild because her attitude was so spoiled. Ash explained that what a spirit thinks is a prank can sometimes turn into a legit tragedy, then warned Dean not to mess things up by talking about them and ruining the chill treatment they were getting. Dean and Note asked to rent a 2-bedroom house for a bit. Jean tried the local drink and thought it was kinda lame. Dean asked Jean if he'd team up with an adventurer from Middleville, promising an intro to someone who was super reliable. They agreed to meet up the next day. Ash warned them both to watch out for weirdos. Dean totally agreed with Ash's take on their stressed-out expressions. The second winter in this new world started with a massive snowstorm. Jean made a warm breakfast of soup, eggs, and toast with jam. He couldn't help but remember how miserable his first winter in the mountains had been. After eating, he got ready to head to Kanam to meet the new adventurer. Ash and Note were already there waiting for him. Ash brought up the potion fee again, but Jean brushed it off, saying he wasn't expecting anything back. Ash insisted on repaying him once their life got a little more stable. Just then, Dean waved Jean over, ready to make the introduction. He introduced Jean to a guy named Lai. Lai immediately said he wasn't good with formal stuff and would rather just talk normally. Apparently, Dean had called Jean a relentless adventurer, which really seemed to surprise Lai. Dean hadn't bothered to mention Jean was good-looking, since he can't stand guys with pretty faces. He apologized, saying he'd already messed up once. Jean just mused about all the hot people he'd been seeing lately. Lai looked totally flustered and quickly said it was time to get going. Jean wondered if the guy had a complex about attractive people. His first quest with another adventurer was finally happening. They started walking through the snowy woods. Lexi explained that he hunts rabbits around this time of year because their fur and meat are in season. He also mentioned that the rewards for hunting bears had dropped off lately. Lexi showed Jean how to track animals by checking out their paw prints in the snow. He could tell horned rabbit tracks from fox tracks no problem. He followed the prints, figuring out that a monster was hunting something. Lai explained that while you could take down normal animals with a short bow, you needed more firepower for monsters. Then he expertly nailed a horned rabbit with one shot, with an arrow just as it was charging them. After a totally successful hunt, they went and sold the perfectly skinned pelts at the guild. Lai was like super chatty the entire time. They celebrated their awesome work with some drinks at a tavern. Jean was way more interested in picking up Lai's hunting tricks than Dean's. Back at his place, he decided to start working out to get stronger. Later, he headed over to the pottery town to pick up his finished bathtub. The potter was totally blown away by the final product, and even helped him carry it. Since Jean couldn't just whip out his storage skill in front of everyone, he had them haul it to a place where no one could see. He was like, "Sorry for the hassle of carrying this huge thing." As soon as they were gone, he popped the tub into his storage easy peasy. Then he got to work installing the new bathtub in his Canham house. He looked at it so proud. At his finished bathroom. Suddenly, Ash showed up at his door with a housewarming gift. They were both completely shocked to find out they were literally next-door neighbors now. Ash explained that Note had found the house for her. Ash admitted that she'd been really happy talking with Jean before. They sat down for some tea and she gave him a fig tart. For real, it was the best tart Jean had tasted in the whole city. He found out that Note had recommended the shop where she got it. Jean then asked if she'd had something custom-made, hinting at the bathtub. He then showed her the brand new bathtub he'd just installed in his house. Ash was floored. She'd never seen a bath that amazing before. Just then Note arrived and Jean invited him in to check it out too. Note was also seriously impressed by the gorgeous bathtub, but he got worried that it was kind of sketchy for a young lady to be offered a bath. He was super curious, but his whole servant duty thing made him hold back. Then he noticed the bathroom didn't have that weird sewage smell. Jean explained that. The toilet was like totally walled off to keep any smells from getting out. Ash then dropped the bomb on a shocked Note that Jean had made the entire thing himself. Note immediately told him he needed to register the invention at the guild like right now. Winter rolled in and it was freezing. Jean went to a lake to hunt some horned geese for their down feathers. He aimed his bow super carefully so he wouldn't spook them. He totally nailed it. He shot a goose with an arrow that had a rope tied to it. He started reeling it in, but the blood brought all these other birds over. He used his transfer skill to just teleport out of there with his prize. He went back to his rental house in Kanam. To warm up by the fire, Note showed up with a housewarming gift for him. It was a futon bedding set made from horned geese feathers, which is like a super fancy item. Jean was shocked since his only cost had been a few arrows and a rope. Ash invited both Jean and Note to have dinner with them. Note was kinda awkward about eating at the same table as his master. Jean served up this epic meal of roast goose and a fig tart. Ash thought the tart was absolutely delicious. Note was really into the turnip soup and was super impressed with the cheese and honey. Jean figured out that amazing food totally puts Ash in a great mood. But then all of a sudden, this tiny black spirit flew right into the last piece of fig tart, completely ruining it. Jean was freaking out, but it seemed like Ash and Note couldn't even see the spirit. He realized his guardian spirits totally failed to block this little guy. He played it off like the tart got ruined by a temperature change and went to grab another one. In the kitchen, he trapped the troublemaking black spirit in an enamel container. Note came to check on him and spilled the beans. That the spirit was his familiar Quinn. Note confessed that he could also see and talk to spirits, a secret he'd been keeping from Ash. He explained that his family, the Paradolls, were like an offshoot of the older Hez family and weren't allowed to outshine the main branch. Note was stunned that Jean could touch the brand he was making. He realized that now the butler also knew he could touch spirits. Later, Jean cruised over to a port town to gather some intel. The country was right next to the one his sister had been sent to. He learned that monsters are basically formed from spirits holding a grudge after humans drain their energy. He started wondering if his hero sister's magic was causing any weird changes to the environment. He overheard some fishermen complaining that people from Schlumpus were totally raiding their fishing spots. They also said some hero or a saint was causing a bunch of trouble over there. Some pickpocket tried to snatch his money pouch, but he caught them like it was nothing. He decided to just buy some seafood and head home. He whipped up a killer meal of fresh and baked oysters. Thanks to his appraisal skill, he could chow down without stressing about getting sick. Rich, though, did not seem to be a fan of the seafood smell. When he tried to use light magic, it was way too bright and basically flashbanged him. He realized he seriously needed to practice getting his magic under control. He headed to the deep part of the demon forest to start his training. He practiced by launching a massive fireball at a monster rabbit. He trained with all sorts of spells and realized he was way more powerful than he thought. After all that practice, he felt like he had leveled up a ton. He'd taken out a crazy number of monsters while he was training. He cast a small light spell, and this time it was way more controlled. Back at the guild, he overheard some adventurer named Chris arguing with the staff. Turns out Chris had scouted the demon forest and couldn't find a single three-horned monster. He was worried because they're basically a sign that even stronger black-tainted monsters are around. Jean got home and found Ash, Note, and Chris all waiting for him. Chris immediately recognized him as Bear Slayer Dono. Chris gave him the nickname Evening Twilight because of his dark hair and eyes. Then he introduced himself as Chris Eads, a legit 3-star silver rank adventurer. He gave Jean a formal handshake and everything. Then Chris asked Evening Twilight to go with him to search for the three-horned monsters. Chris was pretty insistent. Jean was supposed to go hunt for three-horned monsters with him. Jean was hesitant, but Chris was all like, "I've got a good feeling about this," and really pushed it. Dean was surprisingly cool with the whole thing, which Jean thought was super suspicious. Note revealed that Chris was being influenced by an oracle-type spirit, which others perceived as intuition. Because Chris could intuit the future, his requests were taken seriously by the guild. The group discussed the plan with Dean, mentioning the need for silver adventurers. Chris clarified that they were only subjugating a single monster, not staying in the forest for long. Dean begged Jean to join, and he eventually agreed, saying he was a little curious. Jean also asked for Ash and Note to join the expedition. They decided to wait until spring when the snow would be less of a hindrance. Jean suspected his sister's magic use was the cause of the disturbance. He went into the inner region of the demon forest to check on the spirits. Using his vision, he saw that many of the spirits were weak, beaten up, or disappearing. He watched as some black spirits attacked and absorbed the weaker ones. He realized he needed to name the black spirits to control them. He spent time naming the black spirits one by one. He found it tiring to chase and name spirits that didn't want to be controlled. He then visited the Donoso family, who were farmers he had befriended. He brought them souvenirs, and they were happy to see him. He helped them with their work peeling beans by the fire. One of the daughters, Tina, declared she would marry him one day. Her older brother protested, and the other children joined in the fun. Jean found their family atmosphere to be warm and welcoming. When spring arrived, it was time for the expedition. Chris greeted him as Evening Twilight and another adventurer as Moonlight. Lexi, the adventurer from before, explained that Ash was the one who usually hunted bears. Kina, the guild receptionist, thanked him for his cooperation and gave him a potion. The group set off with Jean explaining his versatile self-made bag. During a lunch break, Jean cooked a large pot of stew and some bread. Everyone was amazed by the soft, delicious bread he had made. They enjoyed the fried chicken and other dishes he had prepared. After eating, they continued their journey with Jean trying to copy notes clean gait. Chris warned them that wolves hunt in packs. A pack of wolves appeared and ganged up on Jean, the perceived weakest member. Jean skillfully fought them off, surprising everyone with his strength. They collected the wolves' horns and continued to their campsite. Jean had set up a simple but effective campsite with a waterproof sheet. Chris was impressed, calling him a genius, while Jean recalled his 2 months of survival on the island. They decided to make soup for dinner after catching some fish. Jean prepared a tomato soup with meat and vegetables and also made dough for pizza. The others were amazed by the pizza, a dish they had never heard of before. They all enjoyed the delicious meal, including the salty tomato soup. Chris jokingly offered his condolences to Twilight for not being a fine wife. Dean wondered about Jean's preferred type, and Ash said it was not something a woman should aspire to. Jean admitted he had been confessed to a few times, but had trust issues due to his sister. Dean was shocked that he had been confessed to 3 times, joking he might be cursed. Jean explained that his sister was the root cause of his distrust, as the confessions were all pranks she had orchestrated. Ash listened quietly to his story. Later that night, Ash took over the night watch. She offered him some Florentine biscuits and a light, comfortable coat she had made. She told him he was a good man and that she was sure he would be happy. Jean was embarrassed, but glad to have her as a friend. The next day, the group continued their hunt, having eaten better in the field than in the city. They still hadn't encountered any twin or 3-horned monsters. They enjoyed a meal of Black Mountain goat liver pâté and freshly baked bread. Chris's spirit companion asked if they were sleeping by the river, and Jean revealed he had built a steam bath. He had created a small sauna by heating rocks in a bonfire inside a stone structure. Chris was impressed by his ingenuity for comfortable travel. The rest of the group eagerly asked to use the steam bath as well. After everyone had used the bath, Jean hung the sheets to dry. He noticed a large number of black spirits gathering under the moon. He felt great after the steam bath and was ready for the next day. Suddenly, a 3-horned lizard appeared before them. They were tenacious monsters, and the group prepared to fight. Dean and Chris split up to attack the lizard from 2 sides. Dean distracted it while Chris went in for the kill. They successfully defeated the lizard, proving their skill as a team. They had been in the forest for a week, but had only seen single-horned monsters until now. Chris asked Jean to help dismantle the lizard, and Jean agreed. He was surprisingly good at it from his past practice. He noticed that the area had more black spirits than the training grounds. He learned that the lizard meat tasted like chicken, and that monsters tended to stay away from fire unless they were very hungry. He used his search skill to look for ingredients, and found a monster fox approaching. He realized the fox was likely attracted to the smell of their camp. They covered the lizard carcass with cedar leaves and hid downwind to ambush the fox. The fox was faster than expected and charged straight at Jean. Jean had just defeated a twin-horned fox monster. He was amazed that he had taken it down by himself. Chris and the others arrived, glad to see he was safe. They discussed the presence of twin-horned and 3-horned foxes in the area. They decided to head back to town the next morning. The expedition was over, and they returned without any further incidents. Back at the guild, Jean was eager to go home and prepare a bath. He invited Ash to join him for a bath later. He returned to his house exhausted and was greeted by his fireplace spirits. He had set up a system to communicate between his 2 houses using the fireplace spirits. He used his storage and transfer skills to prepare a hot bath with water from his main house. He greeted Rich and took a quick bath before playing with him. After his bath, a spirit informed him that guests had arrived. Ash and Note were at the door, and Jean gave them their share of the reward. He had also prepared a bath for them. Note asked where Jean had purchased his bathtub, and Jean lied about its origin. He also agreed to sell them the robes he had lent them. Note revealed that a strike team was being formed to investigate the forest, and they would be part of it. He gave Jean a bag of money for the robes, but Jean felt it was too much. Ash finished her bath, and Note went to prepare for his. Jean was struck by how different Ash looked with her hair down. Ash asked if he had seen the spirits in the forest, remarking on their deplorable state. She explained that using magic is rare, as spirits often refuse to help or are forced through contracts. A spirit's power is its existence, so when it's spent, it disappears. The black shade on the spirits was proof of their grudge against humans. Jean realized his sister was on the path to becoming a demon lord, not a hero. Ash explained that the active use of magic helped stabilize spirits. She then revealed that her bird Ozu had chosen not to become a black spirit to be with her. Jean decided to cheer her up with some sweets he had prepared. He served a plate of various cakes and pastries. Ash had never seen such sweets before and enjoyed them. She especially liked the white cream and asked about the red fruit. Jean was glad she seemed happy, and she admitted she was. Ash noted that Ozu seemed happier as well. Lai arrived to ask Jean to make him a bag like the others. He mentioned that silver ranks were being forced to participate in the upcoming hunt. He also told Jean about a gold-ranked adventurer named Adio who would be leading the expedition. Adio was teaming up with a magic user and could supposedly see spirits. Jean decided to hunt more monsters to make bags for everyone and to help Ash by naming the black spirits. He felt it was time for him to get busy again. Jean accompanied Ash and Note on a shopping trip, giving them the bags he had made. He noticed more strangers in town likely for the upcoming expedition. A group of thugs tried to provoke him, but he easily dispatched them. Christine and Lexi appeared, with Chris calling the thugs foolhardy for messing with the black bear. They all went to a nearby restaurant to celebrate their reunion. They shared stories of what they had been doing since their last investigation. Dean had been on the run and his mother had taken control of AML's situation. Note mentioned that people were mixing up Jean and Ash both being strong like bears. Chris thought the bear moniker didn't fit Jean's appearance and would have preferred wolf. Dean was a big fan of the legendary adventurer Balmor, the King of Wolves, which was why he became an adventurer. He gave everyone the new bags Jean had made and they were impressed by the sturdy leather construction. They decided to have a party after the expedition with everyone chipping in. Lai was renting a room near the demon forest and the landlord was planning to install one of Jean's new toilets. After saying goodbye, Jean went to the woods to continue naming black spirits. He wanted to see how Adio's magic-using companion would fare in the upcoming expedition. He headed deeper into the forest to an area beyond the reach of the gods he knew. He was suddenly attacked by a 3-horned monster boar. He easily defeated it with his kill blade and found some wild asparagus shoots nearby. A horned snow leopard appeared and seemed to be trying to communicate with him. It wanted him to form a contract with its friend Masla, a deer-like holy beast. Another animal, a deer, also showed up. In exchange for the contract, they offered to create a sanctuary in the woods that would repel monsters and black spirits. Jean agreed, and the deer offered him a ride to the location. The ride was incredibly fast and intense. They stopped abruptly, and the snow leopard Mao announced their arrival. A horse-like spirit with a wound turning into a black spirit appeared. This was Masla. Jean offered to form a contract, but Masla was stubborn and refused. Jean was persistent, and eventually Masla revealed his name. The contract was formed, draining a lot of Jean's magic. The holy beasts asked for a scenic sanctuary with a spring, and Jean agreed to their somewhat excessive request. Masla offered a ride on another deer named Canal, but the ride was just as rough. They arrived at a beautiful secluded clearing with a spring. Jean confirmed that horses wouldn't be able to approach this sacred place. After they left, he noticed a new addition to his map showing places beyond the gods' usual reach. He was excited to explore and figure out what to do with his new sanctuary. Jean visited the trade city of Nalade to study its advanced architecture. He admired the transparent glass panes, a rarity in other parts of the world. He browsed a shop selling expensive parchment, document boxes, and ornate glassware. He then visited a chemist shop and found cocoa beans. He was surprised by their high price, but bought some anyway along with other spices. He decided it would be good to compare them with the ones at his house. An old man with a beautiful bag approached him. The man politely asked where he had purchased his bag. Jean explained it was a patented design from the Ale region's Adventurers Guild. The man noted that the region was quite far away. He was a merchant who had heard about the convenient new bag design and was interested in it. He then went to a grocery store, looking for books about spirits. Ash and a local man told him that such books would be rare and likely found in aid if anywhere. He learned that nobles often bought books for display, and merchants had private libraries. He found a CD bookstore and asked to see their books for perusal. The shopkeeper showed him both empty display books and real ones, including one with blank pages from a spirit's prank. Jean used his appraisal skill and saw that a spirit was constantly rewriting the book's contents. The shopkeeper revealed the script was only readable by its author. Jean found a set of books with the same spine, believing they were related. The spirits in the books were safeguarding the original copies, not playing a prank. He bought the entire set, spending all his money, and decided to go home. Back home, he began reading the risks and advantages of spirit contracts. He learned that contracted spirits could be summoned anywhere, making magic more efficient. He realized that spirits were more complex than he initially thought, with different attributes and personalities. He was annoyed at the thought of the ball of light spirit being a light attribute. Ash and Note arrived for breakfast before their expedition. Jean had prepared a hot meal, which was a rarity in this world where people often ate cold food to save on firewood. Note explained that many people start work at sunrise and don't have time to cook. Jean gave them a packed lunch for their journey. After they left, he went to stock up on building materials. Now that he had created a safe zone in the forest, he could bring Rich with him. The local spirits were startled by Rich and fled. Jean began building a small 2-story house in the forest sanctuary. He wanted a place where he could name spirits and still be with Rich. During his lunch break, Rich brought him a stick to play with. While relaxing, he thought about planting a garden with various plants. Suddenly, a snow leopard and other animals appeared looking at Rich. A horse spirit, Masla, also arrived, asking why they had brought a human there. The animals were all looking at Rich with reverence. The holy beasts were surprised to see Rich, who had been missing for 5 years. From their conversation, Jean deduced that Rich used to be their boss. He wondered if Rich remembered them or if he just didn't want to. The snow leopard Mao praised Rich's strength and his past feat of protecting the forest from the Apostles of Wind. Jean learned the Apostles of Wind were a previous hero and their followers. They had tried to suppress cattle's influence over the forests and build boats to traverse the water. Jean felt a little guilty for using the resources at Nalad as it was a similar act. The holy beasts explained that the forests in the west had never recovered from the deforestation. Mazel the horse spirit thanked Jean for sparing him from consuming his peers as his once white body had been darkened by the hero's magic. They also warned him not to get too close to the current hero as they were much stronger and protected by higher-ranked spirits. Masla didn't know the details of how Rich lost his memory and power. The holy beasts continued to praise Rich until Jean had to stop them. Jean started a farm at his house in the forest sanctuary, hoping to grow potatoes and tomatoes. He planned to befriend the earth and water spirits to ensure a good harvest. He felt it was time to get busy with farming, building, and naming more spirits. He began construction and planted some vegetables from his pantry without using the growth powder. While playing with Rich, he thought about Ash and the expedition team. He decided to try creating magic circles, something he had read about in one of his books. He mixed the ink with magic power and water that spirits had played in. As he drew the shapes from the book, spirits of fire, water, and earth appeared trying to enter the circle. He decided to summon an ice spirit instead, and Rich jumped into the circle. He realized Rich was the spirit of ice and darkness. He drew a symbol for fertility and poured his magic into it, successfully summoning Pal, the goddess of earth and harvests. He was initially disappointed by the poor quality of the ink. Thinking the summoning had failed, Vaughn and the other gods appeared, explaining that the book's instructions were only for calling nearby contracted spirits. Miss Toto said it was fun to watch him, and Halua remarked on all the fine spirits he had gathered. Ish explained that the small flecks of light were fleeting morning spirits, which made the place comfortable. They all offered to teach him about spirits, instead of him relying on books. Van challenged him to a small sword match to help him learn. They began their spar, and Van quickly pointed out that Jean wasn't moving properly. Van explained he was just imitating others without considering his own body. Van asked him to visualize his sword, and Jean realized his image was influenced by period dramas, rather than fantasy RPGs. Van then transformed Jean's all-kill blade into a Japanese katana. Jean's all-kill blade was transforming into a new weapon. It had become a Japanese katana, the sword of his homeland. He felt it was a fitting weapon for a fantasy world. He and Vaughn got ready for another round of sparring. Jean found it way easier to picture his moves with the new sword. He still couldn't compete with Vaughn, but his sword skills had really improved. He wondered if he could have gotten stronger if he had given it his all from the start. Hal Alpha and Miss Toto praised him, making him feel a bit flustered being surrounded by beautiful girls. Cal gave him a book about summoning spirits, but it was based on wrong ideas. Pal told him to head to the temple in Thelmist after 7 days to find a proper book. Pal and Ish offered to help with his crops in exchange for some of the harvest. Jean learned that spirits could taste the things they were interested in. He later traveled to Nalade to sell the fox hide and horns he had collected. He also searched for new swords similar to his all-kill blade, but found it tough. A shopkeeper showed him some spirit weapons that were either possessed or had turned into spirits themselves. Jean learned that the all-kill blade was a spirit weapon made by Vaughn. He decided to take his blade out of storage more often since spirits like to be in places they prefer. He started his daily routine of scrying on the expedition teams through a basin of water. He saw Adio's gold rank party surrounded by women. Each of the 3 women seemed to be accompanied by a spirit. He then checked on Ash's group and saw they were still a group of 5. He had left one of his spirits with them for safety. He was amused to see Lexi's spirit grooming his beard without him realizing it. He then saw the gold-ranked party fighting a lizard. Adio split the lizard in 2 with a single strike, and the magician spirit finished it off. He noticed another member of the expedition force who seemed off. The man suddenly attacked the archer Nina from behind. Na skillfully dodged and pierced his side with her dagger. A black spirit was possessing the man. Na's attack repelled the spirit, which then tried to possess her. The spirit was forced back to its previous host. Jean wondered how they planned to defeat the black spirit since killing the host seemed to be the only way. He was shaken by the realization of how close to death they all were in this world. He wondered why the archer didn't attack the spirit when it left the host. Remembering that spirits can't be touched by ordinary people, the black spirit then possessed another member of the expedition force, one of the man's comrades. Jean realized there were different ways of seeing spirits, and the archer might not be able to see the black spirits clearly. He decided he had to intervene. Even though it wasn't his obligation, he asked his light and shadow spirits to conceal him and lift him off the ground. He prepared to head out and resolve the situation without being discovered. A member of the expedition force had suddenly attacked another. A robed figure appeared, and the group didn't recognize them. Jean had used a spirit to change his voice and was wearing a robe to obscure his face. He reached into the attacker's chest and pulled out a black spirit. The group realized the man had been possessed. Jean used his heal ability on the unconscious man. The man regained consciousness, and the others called it a miracle. The sorceress Rosa asked who the robed figure was, and what was up with the spirits around him. She could see the spirits, and Jean realized he needed to leave before his identity was discovered. He quickly used his transfer ability to disappear. He reappeared nearby and dealt with the black spirit he had extracted. He made a contract with it and sent it deeper into the woods. He then dispelled the magic that spirits had been using to conceal him. He watched as the expedition force prostrated themselves before the spot where he had disappeared. He decided to ask Ash and the others what happened when they returned to Kanam. At the Denoso farm, Jean was helping the family with their chores. He found himself in charge of cleaning Denoso, one of the kids at the well. He had been studying carpentry and masonry, and decided to help the Denoso family improve their home's sanitation. He felt that even if he couldn't do what was right on a large scale, he could at least help his friends stay clean. The family was amazed by his cleaning skills. He stayed for tea and was asked to help clean a quail for dinner. He explained that he didn't enjoy cleaning, but did it on a whim because he couldn't stand unsanitary places. Shiva the mother served her signature dish leek and quail pitao. Jean enjoyed the warm meal with the family. Feeling it was the ideal family dynamic, he wished he could help his own family have a warm scene like this. He later visited a town known for its lace and silverwork to find Rudel's temple. He was looking for books and was told he could find some there. An old man at the temple recognized him from a prophecy by Rudel-sama. Jean was surprised but went along with it. The old man led him past a statue of Rudel and into a secret room. A secret door opened, revealing a candlelit chamber and a mysterious figure. Jean arrived at Rudel's temple in Thelmist and was greeted by a mysterious child. The child resembled Rudel, but was holding a candle emitting light from small spirits. He realized the child must be a spirit as well. The spirit led him through a hidden passageway to a secret library with towering bookshelves. The spirit who was the library's keeper offered him a book to help navigate the collection. Jean learned the library was created by Rudel for a book-crazed emperor and was moved here before being destroyed. The spirit was related to Rudel, which explained their similar appearance. The spirit showed him so he found this old history book about the El people who were totally protected by spirits. Eventually, the El kingdom just fell apart and its people scattered. The book also mentioned this other group, the people of El, who were good with spirits but not on the same level. Jean thought the library was a legit gold mine and definitely planned on coming back. When he got back to his house in Kanam, he found Ash with her hair all wet. Ash had just taken a bath from a basin and felt super bad for not asking to use his real one. Jean told her it was totally fine and went to boil some more water for tea. Ash was kinda insecure about how she smelled after that long expedition. She gave him a bag of magic iron as a gift, which he took. Then she told him about this person she ran into in the forest who looked just like him. Jean was instantly alarmed, wondering if his face was showing through his robe. Ash explained the guy had spirits with him, and even grabbed one, which made Jean realize they were basically acting as a cloaking device. Some guy in the expedition crew got possessed by a black spirit and went completely nuts. The archer Nina fought back and the spirit ditched him to find a new host. The sorceress Rosa probably didn't see the spirit make a move either, since it was hidden by the host's magic. All the non-stop conflict and magic use in the Middle Plains had basically spawned a ton of black spirits. Ash was worried that Rosa was looking for the stranger, thinking they might be a descendant of the El people. Note showed up with firewood, and they decided to bake something to eat. That's when Note mentioned that a hero had been summoned over in Schlumptas, and the kingdom wanted to find the Lesk person as like a countermove. Jean realized he had to be super careful not to get tangled up in their drama, so he started prepping some castella, pancakes, and a meat pie. Ash was super curious about what he was making. He offered her a bite of the fresh-out-of-the-oven meat pie. Both Ash and Note thought it was ridiculously good. After the expedition, the crew met up for lunch as planned. Dean was really enjoying the fresh grilled beef. Ash was kinda quiet, probably still thinking about those meat pies from earlier. Dean then remembered that one of the monsters they fought was a demonic wolf. He explained that demonic monsters have this dark haze over their eyes. A full-on demon is created when the haze covers its entire body, making it crazy strong. He wrapped up by saying that things weren't as bad as he'd first thought. Chris teased Jean, saying he was a bit of a beast himself. Dean mentioned that the sorceress Rosa and her crew were talking about some hero in Schlumpus. Amidio was planning another expedition and had invited Dean, who totally said no. Chris accepted the invite, because he apparently can't turn down a request from a pretty face. Ash had asked Jean for a favor about the new trip. Lexi was bummed he hadn't been invited, but Jean told him not to sweat it. He figured Amidio was just picking people with spirits tagging along. Lexi warned Chris to be careful since Amidio's buddies could be sketchy. Chris said he pretty much had to go no matter how he felt about it. Ash then asked Jean if he'd go with them, but he shut that down immediately, saying he didn't want to camp outside. Dean mentioned that the bags Jean made were a huge hit with the gold-ranked party. Jean was so happy to hear his work was actually being appreciated. Jean then headed over to the real estate office to check on houses for sale. He wanted to get a feel for the people in the neighborhood before actually buying a place. The agent told him that both the commercial and apothecary guilds had put in a good word for him, so he could buy a house right away, even as just a bronze-ranked adventurer. He decided to just buy the house he was already renting. He also heard that a nearby house owned by a guild was going up for sale after the expedition. He found it kind of annoying but decided to buy that one too. planning to fix it up and rent it out. As he was starting the renovations, Lexi just showed up looking for a place to live. Lexi was surprised that both Jean and Ash had houses there. Jean explained he really needed his privacy for making potions and didn't feel like sharing a well. Lexi was looking for a 3-story house with a storefront for his wife. Jean was totally shocked to find out Lexi was married. Lexi then asked if Jean had a crush on anyone, but Jean said he was way too busy with work. They ate a meal of pasta with tomatoes and olives, a dish Lexi had never tried before. Lexi thought Jean was avoiding the party because he was sensing some drama from the gold rankers. Then Lexi dropped a bombshell: he knew Jean could see spirits. Jean was completely stunned. Lexi told Jean it would be seriously bad news if they found out he could see spirits. Jean was trying to figure out how Lexi could possibly know. Lexi explained that he could tell because Chris doesn't ever call Jean by his name. Jean then realized Chris had never used his or Ash's name but would give names to spirits. Lexi suggested Jean just ask Chris to use his actual name, saying he was a decent guy. Jean remembered Chris gets slammed with requests because Dean turns a bunch of them down. Jean was hesitant to explain everything to Chris because it would mean revealing his secret. He frantically asked Lexi what he should do. Jean's reaction totally confirmed Lexi's suspicions, who then admitted it was all just a bluff. Jean realized he had been played the whole time. Lexi offered to keep an eye on the gold rankers for Jean and told him he should try relying on other people sometimes. Time passed, and Jean kept busy naming spirits and working on his crops and medicine. After finishing the toilets, he planned to remodel the new house. But first he decided to do his whole duty as a protector of the people. Other countries had started their own expeditions, so he used spirits to share info. He went around the forest in a disguise to hear what people were saying about him. He suddenly stumbled upon some adventurers from the Empire fighting off monsters. They were battling two-horned foxes and a tri-horned badger. There were also some owls and bats in the fight. One of the adventurers was shocked to see a bear as well. The disguised boy realized the forest was full of monsters, and the hunters were now the hunted. An adventurer screamed as he was attacked, so Jean decided to step in. He quickly defeated all the monsters surrounding the adventurers. The adventurers were stunned and asked who he was. He then healed an injured man with magic. As he walked away, the healed adventurer tried to call him back. The adventurers regrouped, and one apologized for not being good enough. To mislead people, the boy decided to spread rumors that he was heading northwest. 2 months passed as he continued his various activities. One day someone urgently called for the butler. Jean had asked the butler to cut his hair, but he was turned down. Leslie asked if Jean needed money, but Jean just wanted a skilled person for the job. Ash thought cutting his hair would be a waste, but Jean disliked the bathhouse barbers. Jean suggested shaving his head, but Leslie told him to grow it longer instead. Leslie offered to cut his hair later if he promised not to shave it all off. Jean wondered if he was just that easy to read. The butler then asked why Jean didn't just hire a servant. 2 noisy adventurers along with their friends arrived at the tavern. The butler caught up with one of them about their recent work. The man praised the strength of Amato and his party, making Chris jealous of their spirit weapons. Leslie explained that a spirit weapon is useless unless it likes its wielder. Jean resolved to perform special maintenance on his own blade. The adventurer then revealed that 4 heroes had appeared, and Jean was shocked. Jean had thought only his sister and her friends were heroes. He remembered the gods had not mentioned any others at the time of the summoning. The man explained that heroes start out weak and grow stronger by drawing spirits to them. Ash grew angry, asking who was supposed to be supervising these heroes. Another man added that the magic from the last war increased the chance of monster floods. The conversation shifted as one of the adventurers challenged Jean to a drinking contest. Chris accepted the bet, but only if they would start using his actual name. Leslie noticed the butler looked scary while they talked about brothels. Ash suddenly declared that those brothels were not high class at all. The butler was shocked that this was Ash's main concern. The 2 challengers soon passed out from drinking. Leslie had been caught in the crossfire, so Jean offered to take them home. Jean was only slightly tipsy, so the butler asked him to look after Ash. It turned out Ash was drunk as well. Jean asked if he could walk, and Ash said it was no problem. The butler confirmed that seeing Ash drunk was a very rare sight. Jean worried about the butler cleaning up alone, then noticed Ash about to walk into a wall. He caught Ash telling him he was completely drunk. Jean supported Ash, knowing he would walk into a wall otherwise. He helped the drunken Ash walk down the street. Ash suddenly stopped walking. Jean asked him if something was wrong. Ash then turned and spoke Jean's name. A bystander commented on the sweet atmosphere between the two. Jean asked what was wrong as Ash repeated his name. Jean was confused by Ash's mumbling. Ash then mumbled about a brothel in his hair. He called Jean's name again, mentioning hair, which made no sense to Jean. Jean noticed Ash's face had softened, but couldn't understand the conversation. Seeing Ash's dazed eyes, Jean felt the drunkenness was a bit much. He told Ash that getting drunk in public was dangerous. Ash simply mumbled in agreement. The next day, Jean baked and wondered if everyone was all right. He decided to make something for Ash's hangover. At Ash's home, Jean saw he was not feeling well. The butler's food offer didn't help, so Jean borrowed the kitchen. He prepared a warm ginger and citrus drink for Ash. Ash found the drink to be both spicy and sweet. Feeling better, Ash thanked Jean, who advised him to rest. Ash promised to take him to the Bow of Spirits after he recovered. The butler said he would let Jean know the details later. The following day, they walked together and Ash felt much better. The small bird, Azu, sat happily on Ash's head, while Ash frowned as usual along with a young girl. They arrived at the Bow of Spirits. Ash explained it was the most prominent building in every major city's plaza. Inside, Ash pointed out the various rooms before leading them to the courtyard. The courtyard was beautiful and Jean was amazed. Jean asked if the branch in the fountain was the bow. Ash confirmed it, explaining that was why the place was named the Bow of Spirits. Jean recalled he hadn't read much about it and learned this was a lesser bow. Ash explained the king's bow was a sacred tree where a nation was founded on an oath. Ash had previously told Jean it was a place for good spirits to stay safe. The lesser bow had a similar effect, and breaking the oath would make both disappear. 3 nations had inherited a king's bow. Jean recalled his sister was sent to one of those nations. Pastor Ash explained that a magical field comfortable for spirits is created by offering magic stones. The girl who worked there then approached them. She placed magic stones into the basin of water. Jean wondered how long the expensive stones would last. Ash explained that the stones were necessary to maintain the magic. As he spoke, small fairy-like spirits approached the water. Jean understood that the spirits turned the water into holy water by playing in it. Ash said the place was also impressive at night when they light a fire instead. Ash offered to show him around some other time, and Jean accepted. Ash mused that it sounded like a date, which startled Jean. Suddenly, the bird Azu splashed into the water. The girl commented that Ash was quite a beauty when not frowning. Later, Jean perfectly roasted a sweet potato at his home. His fields were growing well with plants from both worlds. He considered crossbreeding them but felt he lacked the skill. He noticed that different spirits were attracted to different crops. He then saw his dog Rich digging and called out to him. A man named Rudel appeared, stopping Rich from eating onions and shouting that he was not a dog. Jean was startled by Rudel and thought he must have complex feelings for his former leader. A woman with Rudel admired the vegetables. An old woman named Pal and a boy named Ish also appeared in the field. Ish had been watering the plants, for which Jean was grateful. Strawberries magically grew from the ground where Pal walked. With all 3 present, the scene looked like something from a fantasy story. Rudel had simply been standing near Rich the entire time. Pal suggested they try some of the vegetables. Jean learned they could taste things they were interested in, so he agreed. He prepared a salad for them to try. He served them a small sample to start. He nervously waited for their opinion. They loved the vegetables, calling them fresh, sweet, and sour. Jean was delighted that Pal and Ish could taste his food. Rudel also enjoyed the onions, which Jean attributed to Rich's influence. Jean's remodeled house was finally complete. He welcomed Ash, Lexi, and the butler to his home. Lexi was impressed that he had finished the work so quickly. Jean explained that he had pulled out all the stops for the housewarming party. He said he had received a lot of help, though Lexi joked about being worked like a slave. The butler handled the tenants primarily for Ash's sake. The butler had been worried about the Duke making a move on them, but nothing had happened. The butler had quickly decided to rent the second house to Lexi at a reduced price. Lexi asked if Jean planned to find a wife now that he had a house. Lexi clarified he was not ready for marriage yet. Ash then asked if buying a house meant looking for a wife, which Jean denied as he began the tour. Lexi was amazed by the modern walled-off bathroom and bathtub. Jean sternly reminded Lexi of the rental conditions: daily bathing and cleaning twice a year. Lexi praised Jean's work, but Jean admitted he had help from spirits and his storage magic. On the second floor were 3 rooms. Lexi was again wowed, this time by a proper bed. He immediately sat down on it to test it. Jean explained it was better than a straw bed, and Lexi was overjoyed with the comfort. Ash struggled to open a door by pushing it, so Jean showed him it was a sliding door. Ash was amazed by the door, and Jean realized they were uncommon in this world. The third floor was the same as the second, and Jean had added locks as requested. With the tour finished, everyone was excited for the lunch Jean had cooked. Seeing his friends so happy made Jean happy too. Lexi declared that the food was delicious. The butler and Ash agreed, impressed by the gratin Jean had made with morel mushrooms. Jean mused on the Japanese passion for food and decided this world was not ready for pufferfish yet. Everyone continued to praise the meal, from the gratin to the soup. Jean was happy to hear their compliments. Lexi wanted a proper drink, but Jean then brought out dessert. He served them a chiffon cake with maple cream. Ash and the butler were intrigued by its fluffy and delicate texture. Lexi noted that sweets were usually hard and preserved. Jean remembered their similar surprise at his castella pancakes. He learned that sweets were a rare and heavy luxury in this world. Most people only got to eat sweets from artisans on special holidays. Maple syrup was a specialty of the capital, and Jean offered everyone more. Only Ash enthusiastically asked for more syrup. The scene then changed to a young girl protecting her brother from bullies. One of the men threatened her to be quiet. Jean was watching the confrontation from behind a tree. He realized he had stumbled upon a very messy situation. The men were threatening the Denzo children over something involving their father. Jean quickly and quietly knocked out the 2 bullies. The 2 children ran to him, calling him Big Brother. They explained that people had come and taken their father. Their mother had told them to run, but one of the boys was caught. The girl accepted Jean's instruction to be quiet as they went to find her father. Jean felt conflicted about the family situation but prepared to help. He heard a man asking where the children were. He saw their father Denoso on the ground with his wife held hostage. Jean knew the situation was bad. Both parents were now being held captive. The captor holding one of the twins taunted that the king of wolves Balor had gotten rusty. The man was Balor, the infamous king of wolves. Jean was shocked to hear the name. He remembered hearing that only a crazy person would want a moniker like the king of wolves. Balor then slammed Denoso's head into the ground, causing the daughter to scream. Jean rushed in and punched Balor, surprising Denzo's wife. She seized the chance and attacked one of the other men. She moved with surprising speed and skill. Denzo's wife was revealed to be incredibly strong. A woman swiftly attacked a man with a sword, shocking the family with her strength. The man lay on the ground, seemingly taken out quickly. The boy was shocked by how strong the woman was. The man had been skewered clean, which surprised the boy. The woman had really done that, and the boy Jean saw it all but still couldn't believe it. The two children cried for their mom and dad. The woman hugged her crying children. The woman gently hugged the little girl. The man Denu complained that he was abandoned and asked his wife Shiva to untie him first. A house stood in the background. Jean tied Denzo's hands, noticing it looked painful, but Denoso said he had evaded the worst of it. Denzo confirmed it was not as bad as it looked. Denzo asked Jean if he minded, to which Jean agreed, but Denzo sensed Jean had something to say. Denzo offered a spare potion for Jean's injuries but then forgot about it. Jean apologized for dragging him into this, which seemed to come out of nowhere to Denoso. Jean's face looked pale, as he had now seen someone die for the second time. Jean inferred that dispatching attackers was common sense for this world, and the family seemed fine with it. Denoso realized his wife Shiva showed a completely different level of resolve, and he could not win against her as he had only knocked out his opponent. Denoso tried to get Jean's attention as Jean admitted he had forgotten to use magic, which would have put everyone to sleep. Denzo explained that N had a storage skill, which surprised Jean. Jean was surprised by the storage skill revelation. Denoso could use storage, which was rare. Nobles would kidnap someone with a storage skill if they knew, as Jean could fit an entire desk into his storage. Denzo explained that, while N's storage skill was convenient, it was dangerous for merchants who could smuggle things with impunity, creating a tough situation. When Anne acquired the storage skill, people in the temple immediately found out, so they had been pursued ever since, and now had to leave this place, which Denzo would miss. Jean was confused by this. Denoso explained that the gods had recommended they go to Kanam, a place with the least interference from the aristocracy and temples, because Shiva and he used to be famous adventurers. Shiva was from a noble family, and they had eloped, making their story long. They stopped adventuring 4 years ago when N acquired his storage skill, but as adventurers they could still hold their own. They had been staying in remote areas since because Denoso wanted the kids to be able to fend for themselves in case anything happened to Shiva and him. N and Baku would be 8 soon, and Denzo wanted to expand their horizons as they were proficient at animal husbandry and hunting, implying he was going back to his old line of work. It was surprising as Jean thought they were just an ordinary family of farmers, but Denzo was a great father, and he offered Jean a potion. Jean asked about the going rate for potions, but Denoso said not to worry about it, showing a large quantity of potions. Jean insisted on paying if he could afford it, and Denzo agreed. Denzo was splitting the money into smaller bags to ensure they all got there safely and could hire an adventurer if they got separated, and Jean noted it was a lot of money they had saved. Jean had given Denzo a potion, but Denzo offered to make something to eat before they left, while Shiva suggested checking if Jean was hurt. Jean then went outside to take care of something. Jean thought Denzo must be talking about the bodies, and recognized it made sense not to leave any evidence behind. Jean looked at Shiva, who apologized and asked if he was surprised. Jean replied, "No, not really." Showing a blush, Jean then offered to handle the meal so Shiva could help the kids pack up, which Shiva found honest. Jean asked if Shiva could portion the food they were taking along. Shiva looked at Jean and then happily agreed. Shiva thanked Jean. Jean presented the prepared food, saying, "Here we go." The children, along with Baku and Tina, looked excitedly at the food, finding it fluffy. One of the boys claimed he would get better at cooking too, implying his husband would be better than Shiva, while Baku declared that his cute Tina wasn't going to marry anyone. Denzo found the conversation odd, but soothing, wondering if he would hear this banter in Kanam. At dinner, Jean asked how far Kanam was, and Denzo replied about a month and a half with no setbacks, adding that they had gotten another horse, and N's storage skill would help a lot. Shiva wondered if they would ever see Jean again. Jean patted Tina's head, causing her to cry. Jean told them he would see them around while Tina cried, and Baku demanded his pats too. Jean had thought they were going to settle down for good, but then remembered the gods had mentioned dungeons at the start, to which Denzo asked if he meant dungeons. Jean realized he couldn't fit any more into his storage, which worried Denzo. Denzo explained N's storage was full, and Jean said he would take a look, wondering how storage worked, then noticing a squirrel spirit emerge from N. Jean was surprised the squirrel spirit swallowed the item to store it. It seemed these two, Denzo and N, had contracts with spirits, as Denzo was followed by a fire dragon spirit and Shiva by a female ice spirit. It was time for Denoso's family to go. Jean asked if he should accompany them to Kanam, but Denoso declined, stating it was a good opportunity to travel as a family and the Adventurers Guild would point Jean to them. Jean heard Mr. L. Jean clarified he was no person of love, but admitted he was a bit suspicious, since Denoso came out of nowhere without a horse. Denoso denied being suspicious at all. Denzo believed the kids could handle the tough journey, despite it being a bit much. Denzo understood how strong Jean was, but didn't want to depend on his strength when he could do it himself. Denzo reminded Jean that they were friends after all. Jean agreed it was time to get going. Jean told Denzo to head to the streets near the back of the Fox when he arrived in Kanam. Denzo thanked Jean and said he understood. The family departed on horseback, waving goodbye and telling Jean they would see him in Kanam. Jean agreed with Denzo that it wouldn't be quite right to use his cheat here. Jean looked forward to their arrival in Kanam, where he would make sure a great meal and a hot bath awaited. Jean, for a change of pace, was at Gilrock, an ancient archaeological site at the highest point of an abandoned city, encountering monsters and wondering if it had been a palace. Jean encountered a human. Jean was surprised to see another human, wondering if it had been more than 1,000 years since the last one. Jean heard voices, realizing there was something out there in the dark and it had been quite some time. The voices threatened to devour his brain, liver and heart. Jean, in a real pickle, used light magic, crying out, "Eek!" Jean saw many pillbugs, surprised by their number. Jean realized they were the ones talking, but they were bad at hiding and were now running away. Jean apologized for bullying the weak and tried poking them, causing them pain. The pillbugs threatened to devour him, not knowing who they were messing with. Jean continued poking them, ignoring their pleas to stop, and their defensive curl, noting they kept poking when down. Jean realized they were black spirits possessing pillbugs to survive, descendants of spirits oppressed by the people of fire. The pillbugs explained that they ate the brains of stupid humans who came to this land, devouring them through their ears, which gave them knowledge. Jean, admitting they were different, wondered if it was okay to exterminate them all. Jean asked if they had a leader, realizing this wouldn't be his first meal in a while because there was nothing to eat. Jean was shocked to learn they moved as individuals, but thought as one, and if there was a leader, it would be him. Jean noted an exclamation mark, looking at a pillbug. Jean saw a massive and shiny bug, noting it had no tainted spots, like a monster with completely homogenized and perfect color. Jean asked if it was a pillbug too, realizing it was probably a higher level monster, and it responded, "In truth, I am the mind for the survival of us all for a singular purpose." Jean formed a contract with the pillbug, feeling bad about leaving them to themselves. Jean apologized for their hunger, but asked them not to attack any humans. However, if humans came into their territory, they could defend themselves even at all costs, as they were originally a single spirit, a non-negotiable fact. After forming the contract, the pillbugs declared that as long as one remained, they would grow even if they fell individually. Jean didn't have to go out of his way to help them. Jean wondered if this meant these monsters were more dangerous than he first thought, as they would keep coming back unless he killed every last one, and they would continue to grow. The pillbugs asked Jean to supply them with his magic power, as it would sate their hunger. Jean observed that their hunger faded, and the hunger pangs were waning, so they no longer needed to eat humans. The pillbug said that eating humans was not as tasty, but still good. And if they couldn't eat humans, they would hunt monsters when hungry, making Jean wonder if this was thanks to his liberation skill, and if it could free spirits from other things. Jean confirmed that they were strong and would continue to grow. Jean noted they were gone, standing alone. Jean wondered if he had just formed a contract with someone he shouldn't have, thinking he would probably never see them again. About a month and a half had passed since the Denoso family left for Kanam, and Jean had been renovating the new house. Jean admitted he had been doing a lot of renovations lately, despite visiting the library and hanging out with Ash and others. Jean hoped the Denoso family would like their new house, calling out, "Hello, is anyone home?" Denoso greeted Jean, stating a friend of his had referred him to Jean. Jean replied, "Yo!" Denzo was surprised and suggested they go inside before talking more, mentioning Shiva. Shiva told the children to keep their voices down as they were visiting someone else's home. A door opened. The children excitedly asked Jean how and why he was there. Denzo told Jean to be careful as Jean questioned if everyone knew about his suspicious situation. Jean realized it was his house, confirming that once they arrived in Kanam they would find out anyway, and it was painful to hide it, so he gave up. Jean asked when they first came to Kanam and suggested they pretend to have known him for a long time, saying they could tell anyone who asked that they had known him for about a year. He told Tina N and Baku not to tell anyone the actual date. The children were eager to eat Jean's cooking, and Shiva commented it was a shame they had eaten in advance as she asked if Jean had eaten. Jean was looking to sign a 1-year lease on a home soon, but they had left their horse and belongings at an inn for now. Denzo jokingly asked if they had a 4th kid. Then Shiva said she would join in, wondering about his ooze, and made a portion for him. Jean offered Denzo to take a look at the house next door. Jean gave Denzo the key to the house next door, which was available to rent with a caveat, and suggested he look while Jean cooked, even if it was just briefly. Denzo agreed to look, but was surprised Jean had the key. Then Jean explained that this area was close to the demon forest, where monsters had gotten past the walls before, so they should take that into account. Denzo and the kids were surprised Jean was a landlord, and that it was his house too. Jean had prepared skewers and small pies, which were easy to make with jarred marinated tomatoes and mozzarella. Jean noticed they were back. He welcomed them back, noting it was good timing since he had just finished. Shiva was amazed by how much the houses and furniture had improved, finding the house next door amazing in response to Denzo's inquiry. Tina thought the rooms were cute compared to the inn. Baku eagerly claimed the top bunk since there were 2 beds stacked, and Jean was glad they liked it. Denzo asked if they should eat and told Jean he could pick the wine. Denzo remembered the caveat about the rental being the attic, and Shiva confirmed she had found it. Jean wondered if Shiva was the more skilled of the two, asking what the caveat was about. The butler's note had consulted Jean about having an escape route made in the attic, and Jean agreed, figuring it was good to have a route for emergencies since the people living behind him had their own circumstances. After some discussion, Jean sold the house where Lee and others were staying and bought Denzo's current house, creating a secret passage to ensure different ownership on both sides of the escape route for harder discernment. Jean's butler was surprised by the intrusion, and Jean said the others would be home today so he would get them. Denzo was shocked to hear the name Shadow Wolf, a name the butler hadn't heard in years, and asked if Note knew him. The butler Balmore said adventurers used to call him Wolf King, and he believed they met when Denzo first started out, remembering Denzo working them to the bone, which outweighed any notion of him being a mere butler. Jean wondered if the butler had some dirt on Denzo from when he was a novice. Supposing Denzo wasn't always a butler, Balor thanked him for his help then, as it was hard to get assistance from outside the country. Jean realized Denzo was Balor, who was a gold-ranked adventurer who might have disappeared for some time, and Balor introduced himself as the Wolf King Balor to Ash. Denzo explained Shiva gave him the name Denzo, so he went by that now as he didn't recall the name his parents gave him. Jean thought the Duke went ahead with his spirit and asked if he shouldn't have stopped him from doing that, realizing Denzo even knew about Ash and her father using a spirit to make her more manly. Denzo noted it was a hassle to have Jean living behind them, but after seeing the house it would be hard to turn it down, accepting Jean's offer to be in their care. Denzo and Ash shook hands, acknowledging each other. Shiva asked if Jean could tap the back of the shelf, wondering how he knew about the secret passage. Jean tapped the wall. Shiva tapped the wall, and Jean realized it sounded different because it was hollow. Jean confirmed there was also a slight draft because of the hole. The butler deduced the wind came from openings in the house since the building was built without a crack, and they hadn't touched the attic on their side since purchasing the house, wondering why that would be the case. Jean wanted it to be a normal wall, except when people passed through it, thinking if they sealed the gaps the draft wouldn't be an issue. But if they closed the hole, nothing would get in or out, and it would be nice to make the opening invisible with magic. A glowing fairy appeared from the opening in the wall, startling Jean. Everyone, including the butler Denzo and Ash, was startled by the fairy and the closing opening in the wall. Jean exclaimed it was closing up, and the butler was shocked, denying any part in this. While Denzo asked what kind of training he gave him, Shiva reminded Denzo they wanted to lay low, then went to check on the kids as Jean's act didn't seem like him. Jean was concerned his abilities would catch the attention of someone troublesome, mostly his sister from whom he had separated. He also stated that as long as other gods were stronger than that ball of light, he would be okay, questioning what Note was trying to hide and from whom. Note confirmed it was okay for them to find out. Jean explained that people had a hard time sustaining an interest or obsession with him due to a special constitution, and rumors died quickly if he wasn't directly talking to them, so they would forget about him. Note understood, realizing Jean disliked talking and couldn't convince her otherwise, so he just knocked out people who dug into his affairs. Jean admitted he was lacking in a few areas, so he stayed away from group activities. Note mentioned finding it strange that only Ash and he were noted for the medicine they sold, wondering why there was no trace of Jean at commercial guilds. Denzo surprisingly commented it was true. Ash and the butler could see spirits, and guessed his wife could too. But spirits didn't go to Jean at all, to the point of absurdity, making him wonder if N could see them. Jean revealed Denzo could see spirits and asked if it seemed dangerous to have so many people around who could see spirits. Jean was warned to be more careful, as he was the most likely to be targeted, and felt like the most dangerous person there. Jean had a contract with a spirit but didn't want to expose it to outside influences. He was told it was strange he was so strong without any spirits, and asked why his spirit didn't accompany him as he could fend for himself. It was also noted some people lose their ability to see spirits when they stop adventuring. Jean was reminded normal people couldn't touch spirits, and he thought about it. Ash wondered if Ozu was doing fine, as long as it was cute and not like snatched by some weirdos or messed with by strange spirits. Jean was a total sucker for animals, but he wondered if a spirit that weak could even exist, figuring he'd just ask Rich later. Jean hoped he could get his point across some other way, if a straight-up answer wasn't happening, then remembered, oh yeah, normal people can't touch spirits. That really got him thinking. Jean breezed in, calling out, "I'm home," to Rich. He gave the cute little dog spirit a happy pat, noticing a few other tiny dog spirits around. Rich just looked up at him, and Jean thought he was seriously the cutest thing ever, no matter what time it was. Jean had to admit, out of all the spirits he'd ever seen, Rich was hands down the cutest. He asked him, "Hey, would you be cool with following me out into the real world?" Jean waited, trying to guess what he was thinking. He wondered if he was basically talking to a wall, and said they could try again later if Rich wasn't feeling it. He totally didn't want to force him, but he'd be stoked to have him along even with all the people out there. Rich actually smiled, which left Jean trying to figure out what that even meant. Someone exclaimed, "Whoa, it's a puppy, it's so adorable." Dean and Ash looked totally floored. Denoso reached out to pet Rich, but Jean shut that down immediately. He told Denzo firmly, "Don't touch Rich." Dean and Chris were still freaking out that Rich was a dog, and Ash was super bummed that she couldn't pet such an amazing creature. Denzo was actually supposed to be cooking for Dean and the others today, and was hoping to use the chance to hang with Rich as a thank you for the food Jean had hooked him up with the other day. Denzo confirmed it was that family Jean mentioned who was coming by for bread, right before they heard someone at the back door. Dean and Chris were shocked Jean had company, and the butler apologized for just dropping in. Dean looked completely shocked. Jean just explained that he had way too many mushrooms, so he invited some people over telling them to hang on a sec. The butler immediately said he had nothing to do with this. Denzo reminded Jean, "Hey, we agreed to share the blame, but this was totally unexpected." He then pointed angrily at Rich by Jean's feet and asked, "Is that my fault?" Denoso asked if he meant Rich, and if he'd shown him to anyone else yet. Jean explained that he had literally just introduced Rich to Ash and the others. Someone asked why he even brought a spirit along, and Jean just said it was fine since it was just Ash and the other three. Denzo was stunned that the puppy was a spirit. While the butler pointed out that there's no such thing as a dog that doesn't leave footprints, Denzo realized Rich was actually a crazy powerful spirit, even though he'd always been there and seemed so fragile at first. Jean got the message that he probably shouldn't take Rich out in public since Rich hated crowds anyway, and it would just cause a huge scene. Dean asked what kind of spirit he should be taken around while Chris just really wanted to fluff up Rich. Ash asked if it was cool for them to be there, and if she should give Azu back to him. Jean told Ash not to worry about it since he was the one who invited her, and he'd actually feel better with Azu there watching over her. Chris thanked Jean, promising he'd do his best not to let him down. Denzo, who had some kind of dragon or lizard spirit with him, mentioned that adventurers usually roll with fire spirits. Jean asked if it was time for introductions, and Denoso, calling himself a geyser for some reason, introduced himself to Letty, then told him not to call him that. Dean was freaking out, realizing Denzo was Balur, the king of wolves who went missing in a dungeon, and Balmor just confirmed it. He announced they'd be back in action starting tomorrow. Dean introduced himself to Chris, saying it was an honor to meet a living legend, while Chris just introduced himself back. Someone told Dean to shut up and stop acting so weird since Balmor was way too famous for anyone not to know him. Dean argued back that only someone totally out of the loop wouldn't have heard of him, and that the people who knew him personally were usually older, admitting he wasn't sure about that part. Denoso, looking apologetic, handed Jean some bread and explained he was just a loving husband to Dad, and to him just Denu. Denoso the Wolf King told Jean not to walk around town with that spirit if he wanted to stay low-key, and Jean totally agreed. Jean then picked up that Denoso was thinking about training his kids. Denoso looked surprised, but confirmed it, wondering aloud if he should only teach the boys. Jean thought things were about to get rowdy at the guild since a guy of Denoso's level should be raiding dungeons, not chilling in this town. Jean told Dean he was fangirling way too hard and it was grossing him out. According to Dean, the kids were this adorable set of siblings, twin boys and a girl. He said any guy would be interested because Denoso, even though he was a bit older, had made a huge name for himself. Denzo was planning on training all three kids, not just the boys. Dean thought it must be nice that Denoso's wife was both beautiful and strong, totally agreeing with Jean. But Jean had to correct him that her name was Shiva, not Ice Queen. While holding Rich, someone asked Jean if that was his type, but he said he didn't really have a type per se. He definitely envied the whole Denoso family, though. Jean thought the Denoso family was cool, even if they weren't the farming family he originally thought they were. He was more jealous of their whole vibe together than the actual people. Jean figured Balmor and Shiva would be perfectly fine on their own, but thought they should probably keep an eye on the kids, which Balor thought was a good idea, and said he appreciated it. Seriously, Balor was grateful for the offer. Jean was like, "I'm sure you, Shiva and Denzo, would do a way better job than I ever could. You guys should handle it." Jean agreed to help Note get ready for dinner, and Note just said, "Very well." Jean wondered if things were different for stronger spirits because he still wasn't sure if it was right to hold Rich like a normal pet. Jean chuckled, saying he would try and rein it in a little. Jean spotted Lai in town. Jean called out to Lai. Jean thanked Lisi for keeping him company, telling him not to worry. But if he was looking for blacksmiths, he would find more in a bigger city. Jean found Rosa a pain to deal with, despite everyone saying she was a compassionate healer, thinking she was a total villain. And he would pass on her because he believed everyone would just be her minions. Jean wanted to use the magic ore Ash gave him, wondering if it processed like normal iron, and heard that if this furnace was powered by spirits, the quality improved a ton, but the process should be the same. Jean affirmed he had the setup for this kind of thing, but he would do it himself. Apologizing for asking Lexi to show him around, he said he wouldn't bother asking where Lai kept his stuff. Jean looked surprised and exclaimed, "Bleh!" Jean wanted some kind of special sauce for the meat, but guessed it didn't exist in this world. And now that Denzo mentioned it, the meat did smell a little off, asking if it was nasty. Jean thought it was crazy he didn't want to eat out at most places these days. He'd really gotten used to Denzo's cooking, and Denzo said he could just copy his recipes like the pizza the butler made with asparagus the other day. Denzo said it was a good thing to eat his vegetables, and Jean agreed, admitting he had barely left the house and had started grilling meat at home, though it wasn't anything serious. Jean got everything ready, calling on fire spirits to help him forge a sword. Jean continued forging with sparks flying. A lizard spirit also helped, and Jean thanked everyone, noting that was a whole lot of sparks. Jean explained that with all these spirits helping, making a bigger item was totally doable, as he had only messed around with smaller stuff before. Jean admired his completed sword with a house in the background. Jean's sword was complete, and he smiled proudly. Jean saw the sword's tip was colored differently like the morning dawn, and wondered if he should try it out, but told Rich to stay put since it was dangerous. Jean wielded the sword, exclaiming, "Whoa." Jean thought the sword was sick, but he couldn't even use it. Jean was sure Denzo would chew him out for what he'd just done again. Jean asked Rich what they should do, as this was the magic iron Ash had given them. Jean knew Rich was cute, but that wasn't the point. He would have to apologize for totally wasting the gift. The butler and Ash greeted Jean, who showed up looking totally bummed out. Jean offered sweets and wine as his sincere apology, explaining he had made a mistake with the magic ore Ash had gifted him, making it unusable, and wanted to say sorry for wasting such an awesome gift. Ash responded there was no need to apologize, since it was a gift, and he was free to use it however he wanted. The butler suggested maybe Jean could melt it down and reforge it, noting Jean was also a trained smith. Jean realized he hadn't thought of that since it was still steel, and wondered if he could salvage it if he melted it down. Jean pondered if it was possible to do that. The butler suggested they call Baldinoso to show them the messed up sword. Jean was surprised, sensing something sketchy behind the butler's smile. Jean offered eclairs, which were the same as the ones from his apology gift basket. Ash thought they were super tasty. Jean was glad that Ash liked the eclairs. He and Denzo sat together at a table. After stealing herself, Ash asked to see the sword, so Jean agreed. He got the sword. A fiery sword then appeared in Jean's hand, startling everyone there. Denzo questioned where Jean had gotten the sword from. Jean was confused why Denzo was so surprised it came from his storage. But Denzo insisted he should keep it a secret. While the butler felt it wasn't a problem, Jean was confident he had covered his tracks, and Denzo examined the sword, while the butler pleaded with Jean not to melt this beautiful piece of work. Ash declined the sword since she didn't have a companion fire spirit, so Jean offered it to Denzo instead. Denzo asked about the sword's material, and cost, advising Jean not to give away a weapon like that so easily. The butler identified the blade's style as from the Northern Islands, noting they were usually made with molds. But Jean clarified that he had hand-forged this spirit sword himself with magic iron and help from the spirits. Denzo told Jean it was fine as long as he didn't use the spirit sword in public. Denzo still thought Jean was in the wrong, stating it wasn't normal to make swords like that, and the butler asked Jean to lower his standards. Jean explained that he simply didn't want a weapon that would break easily, and wasn't willing to skimp on quality. Dean arrived looking for Jean, who just wanted to chill. Dean came in and was shocked to see Balmore wishing him a good afternoon. Dean and Jean stood opposite each other. Jean explained that they were trying to work things out, so Dean told him to just take it easy. Dean smelled the eclairs Jean had left over for Ash, and asked if he could have a bite. He was shocked after taking a bite, exclaiming that the sweets were probably worth a whole house, Jean confirmed. They were real strawberries, which along with the vanilla beans and cacao were basically unheard of. Denzo told Jean that making a sword to the highest standard was fine, but other personally made items should be kept private. Jean then decided he would make more swords. Denzo refused, saying he already had his own sword. Jean decided he would start by making swords for Ash and Shiva. Then he'd ask Chris and Lexi later. Jean wondered what attribute and spirit to use for his own sword since he wanted to go look for dragons. He was then shown working at his forge. Jean was so hyped about the bed and totally thanked Lai for helping him out. While Lee was chilling with some tea, Jean went to grab him a drink, explaining it was actually coffee, and just a heads up, most people think it's kinda bitter. Then he busted out these 2 awesome lanterns he'd made. Jean offered one to Lai as a thank you, explaining he had to get into glass blowing for them, which led to him making other cool stuff like wine glasses and a beer mug, too. He said these glasses were made of super tough glass, so they were perfect for every day, just not for hot drinks. Lai had seriously never seen glass so clear before, so Jean decided to get Note to come check it out too. Lai mentioned he'd bought some red glass before, but it was way more cloudy and he wondered if they should hide the good stuff from guests. Jean thought about maybe putting a door on the kitchen shelves to keep the nice cutlery on the down low. Meanwhile, Rosa's crew was trying to get Denozo to join up, and Lexi asked Jean if he'd thought about going on a hunt. Jean had been dropping hints about the north to try and lure Amato back, and he suggested Denozo's family could just disappear into the woods for a bit. Jean then asked Lai to come hunt rabbits with the kids, but Leah was like, nah, worried he'd just slow them down. Lexi figured the kids were way tougher than him anyway, since they survived a crazy long trip and were literally training for a dungeon. Lexi thought Jean was way more childish than she expected, and was probably going to be a total headache for Denozo. The Denozo kids were super stoked to see Jean. He hugged Tina, who thanked him for the knife he gave her, which made Denozo totally question what she meant by cuts. Jean explained he'd actually forged some kitchen knives for both Shiva and Note. Shiva invited Jean to stay for dinner because Denoso had caught a deer, which got the kids all hyped up. Shiva told her husband to carve the meat, which totally surprised him. Denoso instantly knew the knife was one of Jean's creations. Shiva rushed him, reminding him that the kids were waiting. Jean tried the venison with cream sauce and told Shiva her cooking was legit amazing. Denoso proudly agreed, adding that the side of beans with baked cheese was from the first harvest of the season. Jean felt like being with them made him want his own family, especially while eating all the delicious food. The kids started goofing off, declaring who was going to be Jean's husband and wife, which completely caught him off guard. Tina said her dad would never allow it, and Denoso was like, "You got that right." The kids kept bugging their dad about it, but he wouldn't budge while Jean could tell they were just playing. Shiva asked Jean if he had made Ash's clothes because she was having a hard time believing Ash was a girl. Denoso then asked Jean why he was there, and Jean invited him and Ash on a monster-slaying mission. Since Dean, Chris, and Lexi all said no, Jean figured he'd just ask them again before they left in 5 days. No matter what, Jean was going to ride a horse. He was dead set on learning how to ride. Lai was shocked Jean didn't know how, since literally everyone else in their group was a pro. Jean had a sudden realization that he was the only one who couldn't, even though it was like a basic skill for adventurers. Lai explained that he traveled a ton to build up his reputation, so people would be cool with him. Then he asked if Jean had for real never even tried riding before. Jean admitted he'd ridden a deer before, which Denoso immediately said didn't count. Denoso offered to take Jean to a stable to pick out a horse, saying that worst-case scenario, he could just ride with one of the kids. Jean announced that he thought he actually knew a horse. He explained that he had a contract with one, but wasn't sure if it would let him ride. And if not, he'd just ask his other contracted animals. Jean invited Lai to go into the forest with him, offering some wine as a bribe to get him to tag along. Denoso reminded Jean that he still needed to learn how to ride, and should totally use the chance while they were at the stables. Denoso warned him that if he didn't get used to it fast, his butt was going to be in a world of hurt. Jean felt like this was the whole ordeal, maybe even tougher than hunting monsters. The group got to a stable and the place looked awesome. There were tons of different horses, including some bred just for pulling carriages or being pack horses. Ash and Note came along to help teach Jean, and he noticed Ash knew a surprising amount about horses. Note suggested a war horse for the forest, but then thought a tamer one might be a better idea, also pointing out that renting a war horse would cost a fortune. All of a sudden, a horse came over and started nuzzling Jean. The stable hands ran over, apologizing, explaining that this horse was a notorious escape artist. The horse actually knocked over the stable hands because it seemed to really like Jean. Ash joked that Jean was popular with all sorts of things. The horse kept affectionately rubbing against Jean, who was not exactly thrilled about being popular with some rowdy horse. The stable hand said they'd never even put a saddle on this one before, so Jean asked for something to hold on to. The stable hand offered him stirrups, explaining that some people just ride without them. Jean compared them to training wheels on a bike, and the guy noted that some people think they're embarrassing to use. Ash explained from her horse that stirrups are a must-have for using weapons while riding, and that trying to look cool wasn't going to save his life. The stable hand introduced the horse as Luther. Jean introduced himself to Luther, explaining he'd never ridden before and basically begged the horse not to buck him off. Note held the reins while Jean got on, telling him his athletic skills would make it super easy. Now that he was on the horse, Jean started with a slow walk. He asked Luther to get a move on. Then Jean told Luther to pick up the pace. The horse started trotting, and Jean thought the whole experience was actually pretty sweet. It was just vibing with the view from up on his horse until he told it to stop. But Note was like, "Dude, you'll never learn to ride for real if you let Luther do everything." Jean's thighs were totally killing him, but Ash was hyping him up, saying he was a super fast learner. She even mentioned this other horse went totally wild when she tried to ride it. Ash was like, "Let's go again tomorrow," and Jean was down to pack them a lunch. The sunrise was seriously epic. Jean, Ash, and Note were cruising on their horses through this open field. Ash called for a break by a tree, and Jean was shook by how fast she was giving his horse Luther a little thank you pat. Then Jean was like, "All right, guys, I made lunch for everyone." Of course, Ash and Note thought his cooking was legit amazing, and he busted out 3 different kinds of sandwiches. Jean even offered some white wine to go with the egg sandwiches, which Ash had already snagged. The spread also had fried chicken onion rings and shrimp spring rolls, and Ash was like, "We should totally try making this stuff at home." Jean told them all the ingredients were just from town, but he kept his secret anchovy weapon in the egg sandwiches on the down low, already plotting to hit them with it in a rice dish next. Then Jean brought up this dish that was kinda like paella, that he'd made before, something you couldn't get around Kanam. Ash just stared at Jean like super intensely. Then she told him he should just cook whatever he wants. Jean was totally thrown by her sudden mood swing. Note decided it was time to head back. Ash then declared that one day she'd be strong enough to do whatever she wanted without being afraid. Jean was seriously stunned by Ash's super bold and powerful speech. Even Note was blown away and got all emotional, calling her my lady. Jean felt kinda awkward with all the intense vibes, wondering where that put him, and if he wasn't strong too. Jean was definitely acting different today. He showed off what he'd brought along. Some guy immediately identified them as potatoes. Jean was like, "Yep, that's right." He'd come all the way to Nalade to sell them, figuring he'd introduce them to this world, since he couldn't use stuff from his own. Farmers were already getting on board because potatoes were way tougher and easier to store than wheat, which was always getting targeted during wars. Jean had heard that people used to just grow potatoes for the flowers, but now they were finally seeing them as actual food. The guy was so glad that fewer people would starve, but he mentioned a major problem had popped up with the potatoes. Apparently, some people were saying they were poisonous, and Jean instantly figured out it was because they weren't prepping them right, like the sprouts and green parts are a total no-go. Then in a flashback, this little kid gets sick because his sister swore only the sprouts were bad. The guy Sir Solol asked Jean if he knew what was causing the whole issue, and Jean was basically like, "Yeah, I do." A map pops up showing Jean's different aliases, Jean and Kanam, and Solol in Nalade, a name he could totally ditch if it got too much heat. They asked him to spill what he knew about the crop, and he agreed, but with a few conditions. Jean asked for a house on the island, which he figured should be a piece of cake for the crazy rich Alloway family, even though the city was super competitive and had no openings. The guy thought that was a tough ask, since Jean just wanted an address for his Solol alias, but they agreed they could at least track down the source of the problem even without knowing why. Jean then got ready to bounce. But the guy told Jean to hang on and give him some time to talk to the head of the family. He was pretty sure the family head would be totally hooked by the potatoes, even with all the poison rumors. He then asked for a sample of the crop to show them, and Jean was cool with that. Jean handed over some boiled potatoes, promising him they were totally safe to eat. The man thanked him, and Jean just laughed, explaining that he wasn't dumb enough to hand over something they could use to grow a whole new crop. So the guy offered Jean a place to live on this tiny unmapped island instead. Jean took the deal since his transfer skill made travel super easy, and the Alloway family offered to help with his business and let him use their name as backup since they couldn't get him the house he wanted. Jean then explained what makes potatoes toxic, like if they're not ripe, get too much sun or damaged, start sprouting, or have green bits, and told him to always peel the skin. He gave the guy the first sample and promised to bring the rest as soon as he got paid, and had the land permit, admitting to himself that he was totally using his appraisal skill to rig the game. Jean decided to scope out the other islands before heading home, knowing he'd have to warn them about the crops not growing as well in a few years if they kept working together. He just took a sec to think it all over. Meanwhile, Denzo could not believe what Ash had just said, asking what her standard for strength even was. The butler told Denzo to take his bragging somewhere else, saying his lady had been a knight for way too long. Denzo was totally shocked to find out that Jean could probably wreck the entire town in a second if he really went all out. Dean commented that Jean didn't seem weak, just more like the kind of guy who'd keep a house spotless, not take a life. Jean admitted he doesn't do stuff he doesn't have to, but he'd hunted birds for their feathers before, so he couldn't really deny what they were saying about him. Dean noted that Jean's good side still came through, even when they were talking about total destruction, and then checked in their card game. The butler called, and Dean raised, telling Jean to check with them before he levels any places right before he slapped down a 4 of a kind. Turns out Dean's check was a total bluff, and he suggested they bounce a day earlier than planned. A new girl, Nina the Archer, had just shown up in town. She got there way earlier than expected, and the rest of her crew wasn't supposed to get there for a few days, which meant they could avoid any awkward run-ins. Jean confirmed he knew about the whole hero summoning thing, because, surprise, he was connected to it. 4 heroes were summoned. But get this, one of them was supposedly a changeling. Jean was like, wait, a changeling, isn't that like a baby swapped by a spirit? He remembered reading about it in some books. The stories were all about these sketchy half-formed holy spirits, getting switched with real kids and then just poofing out of existence once they got big enough. But this changeling with the heroes was a whole different story. The theory was that it was a copy of someone they loved and had to leave behind in their old world. And since human memories are super unreliable, these half-baked changelings had to literally chow down on spirits just to hold themselves together. People had actually seen it eating spirits. But Nina said that anyone who saw it got silenced like so fast that nobody knew who the changeling really was. When they started talking about 4 heroes, it hit Jean that it could be his sister and her crew, friends with a replica of a loved one that was recreated. It was said they were using magic all willy-nilly and causing a bunch of trouble. Denzo doubted that any countries would mess with them, since they'd probably find a sweet deal for keeping rogue spirits out of their territory. Word was that heroes help power up gods, and with the wind, God's influence being so huge, no country was going to let them go that easily. It looked like Nina and Rosa totally wanted to take care of the changeling problem, but they didn't really have a good reason to unless the heroes kept messing things up. And while it was probably best to deal with the changeling ASAP, Jean just wanted to make sure N didn't get dragged into all this drama. Denzo was all about family first, no matter what. Unlike Jean, who kind of figured someone else would handle the heroes. You couldn't just spot the changeling by watching them, cause who knew if their relationships were the same as back in their old world. It looked like the hero squad was made up of 2 sets of siblings, one pair with a big bro and the other with a big sis. And they actually knew their names, Haruka, Hizetsugu Yuka, and Jin, which was totally Jin's old name. So yeah, their names were Haruka, Hizetsugu Yuka, and Jin, 2 pairs of siblings, and one of them was a changeling, but nobody knew which one. Then it clicked for Jean, the changeling had to be the little brother. Denoso was shocked, but confirmed those were the names he'd heard. Jean figured it was a body cooked up to look just like him, based on the memories of his sister and her friends, pointing out that his sister was never capable of actually loving him. He was pretty sure it was more like some creepy obsession, this totally gross fantasy where he was her little puppet. He made it clear that only 3 heroes were actually summoned. He just got dragged along for the ride. Jean didn't really know his sister's friends that well, and wondered if they looked different in this world. He bet his self-obsessed sister didn't change a single thing about herself, though. But probably asked to be prettier or younger, while his own blessing for creating stuff made them pretty much on the same level power-wise. Denzo remembered a god named Rich from the Demon Forest, and Jean confirmed he'd gotten blessings from more than just Rich. Denoso started worrying that if the heroes got fighting skills, they'd be way stronger than Jean, and it would be seriously bad news if no one stepped in to stop them. The butler asked if Jean was cool with just leaving them be, and Jean was like, "Yeah, I'm staying far away from them." He'd read that the fate of the world didn't totally depend on what the heroes did. Then the scene cut to a card game with a full house sitting right there on the table. The story goes that the big shot wind god just vanished after a hero summoning, and even though heroes were supposed to bring stability, people were still arguing about what they actually do. Denzo was totally floored by how the game was turning out. It seemed like the world was technologically stuck in the past, because heroes kept getting summoned over and over, basically burning everything to the ground each time. Summoning heroes to eat up spirits was probably just a cosmic spring cleaning to keep the world balanced. It was all about stabilizing spirits, not helping people. Then Jean slapped down a royal flush, calling his win. Denzo got on Jean's case for playing his trump cards, and for comparing huge conflicts to spring cleaning. Jean just said that as long as the spirits were in balance, there was no problem. He explained that while the heroes get rid of spirits, he's out there making stuff to even the score. Jean wasn't sure if what he was doing was actually better, but since the Empire had this history of new places just popping up, he figured it was probably okay. He remembered reading in a book that a spirit turns itself to stone when it gets too powerful just to keep things balanced, and that a petrified wind god's body was used for the hero summoning. Jean was being super careful to make sure Rich didn't turn to stone. He decided his best move was to just create a bunch of stuff and make deals with spirits so they wouldn't even need to summon heroes anymore. Denzo wondered what even happens to heroes after their sponsor god just pieces out, and if the hero's ball of light would eventually turn to stone too. Denoso wasn't sure how heroes were treated after they were done, but the records showed some became awesome healers, or defended their countries. Jean figured they probably lived like total rock stars after their job was done. He decided that unless it was their problem, it was best to just let the heroes do their thing. Denoso called Jean a rogue hero, joking that he needed meds to deal with the stress of having one around. Denzo was shocked to find out Jean was from another world and not some kind of chosen one. The butler asked about Jean's history with the heroes, but he wasn't about to spill the tea on that. Then the butler asked if there were any warning signs before a spirit starts to turn to stone. Some old guy was off picking fruit in an orchard. Jean explained that spirits start acting all weird and can't hide their presence anymore. He was worried that Miss Toe and Hala might turn to stone way faster than the ball of light. Halalfa popped up thinking it was totally cute that Jean was worried about them, but Mto told her to lay off and not mess with him so much. Jean started wondering if maybe hiding out with some cows was the smartest play. And Cattle noted that Jean's contracts had increased their number of subordinate spirits. The more followers a spirit has, the bigger its vessel gets, meaning spirits contracted by Jean would be linked with these great spirits, and be less likely to petrify. Jean asked about the balance between spirits and matter, and Cattle told him to just keep creating matter, since there were still way too many spirits. Cattle also suggested strengthening the link between buildings by using ashes from where spirits lived, or a mix of honey and flour, which Jean realized meant he needed to make mortar. Jean worried that while the spirits might like it, the ants would too. Jean thanked Cattle for the info, and Cattle vanished. Namina commented that it was a rare sight to see the uptight Cattle get all embarrassed. Jean said he needed to get ready for the next day and said his goodbyes. Then we get a shot of the night sky. Since they would be busy hunting monsters, Jean decided to have ramen for dinner since he probably wouldn't get to eat Japanese food for a long time. Jean got the ingredients ready for his meal. He held a bottle that probably had soy sauce in it. He announced that the ramen was ready and it was time to dig in. The meal was delicious with a mixed broth soup and gyoza that stayed crispy thanks to his storage skill. Jean finished his awesome meal. Later, Jean sat by the fireplace with his spirit dog, Rich. Rich was chewing on a rope toy. Jean thought about how Denzo and the others were way more chill about his situation than he expected. They were worried about him, warning that his strength and immaturity could be used by some bad dudes. Jean decided to keep making new things but to keep who he really is on the down low, since there were already 3 heroes in the world. He remembered how Lai was the most freaked out by the idea of transferring a contracted spirit and then decided it was time to hit the sack. Jean petted Rich, calling him a good boy. It's revealed that the wind god Landoro wasn't originally going to petrify, but Rich fought against him. Their battle sped up the wind god's petrification, and Rich, since he'd gotten more powerful, was chosen to summon the next heroes, but he totally failed at it. Jean wondered if Rich had failed on purpose. Jean sat with Rich by the fire. He felt like that might be the case since his little pup was smart. Jean decided it was time to hit the hay. The next morning, someone called out to Jean. His whole group had gathered and said good morning to him. Denzo's kids also greeted him cheerfully. Denzo confirmed that everyone was there. Letty cracked a joke about their matching cloaks, wondering if they were all dressed up like Santa. They had some bags of laundry to drop off before they left, since it would get moldy if they just left it. Denzo announced it was time to head out. The group then headed out on their journey. Jean was at the stable calling for Luther. He asked the horse to take good care of them. He then petted Luther, calling him a good boy. Denzo joked about Jean bribing the horse with a sugar cube, but Jean explained it was to avoid looking like a total noob. Jean felt that relying on Luther was the only way he could not look like a complete fool in front of the kids. Denzo explained how they would split the kids up among the riders since he and Denzo were heavy and Jean was a beginner. One of the twins got super friendly with Chris rubbing their chin all over him, which confused Jean. Jean took a closer look, wondering what the chin spirit was doing. He saw a tiny fairy on Chris's chin and wondered if they were fighting for attention. Denzo said he had chewed Baku out, but Chris felt calm when he played with his chin, and he wondered how other people deal with that kind of thing. As the group rode off, Tina said she wanted to ride with Jean later. Denzo immediately shot her down flat out, declaring he wouldn't let her ride with any guy but him, which got him called a meanie by the kids. Lai remarked that it was easy to chill out around Jean and that the whole Denzo family seemed to go nuts whenever he was involved. Jean wondered if this was a side effect of his liberation skill, but Lexi blew it off as just his imagination as they entered monster territory. Denzo warned that there were a lot of ape monsters in the area that moved in big packs and that his and Shiva's spirits had been scaring them away. As if on cue, a pack of 8 monsters showed up, and Denzo declared it was time to fight. The main monsters in the abandoned mine were worms, beetles, and rats, and the group was warned to watch out for shaky spots in the ground. Jean explained that he had gotten his stick from the guy who sold them the torches. He said the stick would be handy for tapping the ground to check if it was stable and for holding the lantern he had given to Letty. Jean mentioned that adventurers hunted the monsters here because magic ores could form inside their stomachs from the dirt and rock they ate. The inside of the mine was surprisingly humid. Since some passages were probably flooded from the rain, Denzo picked up a stone from the ground. He then expertly threw the stone into the darkness. Denzo announced Gotcha Jean was impressed by his resourcefulness and his ability to see a rat in the dark. A dead rat was lit up by Tina's torch. They found a huge dead rat, and Denzo decided to check its stomach for a stone before using it as bait for more monsters. Denzo told the kids to watch him closely, since he was a total pro at this. Jean noted that this made sense for a family that ran a farm, though he was still a little hesitant about fantasy creatures. After setting up the rats as bait, the group took a break, and Jean offered some snacks. The kids cheered while Shiva wondered if the snack was cheese. Jean told them it was cheesecake, which he had cut into easy-to-eat bite-sized pieces. Lisi loved the cheesecake, complimenting its crumbly texture and nice tartness. Something was drawn to the bait. Jean noticed the cheesecake was more Lexi's style than Ash's, and thought a strawberry sauce might make it even better for her. 7 or 8 rats of the same kind showed up, and Denoso asked if the kids were up for the challenge. The kids eagerly agreed. They then rushed the group of rats with their knives. En praised Baku for his successful kill. A rat suddenly popped up behind En. As En turned, another rat lunged from the side. Shiva jumped in, killing the rat just in time. Denoso asked Shiva about the knife she was using, and she told him it wasn't her cooking knife. She explained that using her ice sword this close up would drop the temperature and mess with everyone else. Denoso told Jean to quit staring at him like that since he was the one who made the knife. Denzo noticed that the rats didn't seem to have much magic ore in them. They decided to head deeper into the mine to find bigger monsters, figuring it took more time for the ore to form. Chris was taking the situation way more seriously than Dean, and he looked up to Denzo, who was a total legend. Denoso commented that any excitement he felt totally vanished when he saw those two, and then announced it was time to get a move on. Jean offered them a lantern to use. Lai was surprised by the lantern Jean had made, pointing out it was a simple-to-use oil lamp. The kids were blown away by how pretty the lantern was, and were dying to hold it. Jean passed the lantern to them, saying he had enough in his storage for everybody, but thought it would be a hassle to bring them all out. At this depth, you could find larvae and worms, and the dry ground could easily collapse. So Jean asked about the holes they saw. A giant bug suddenly burst up from the ground. Jean was freaked out by the huge bug and poked it with his stick. It looked like a stag beetle larva with sharp teeth. These monsters would wait in holes and spray acid at their prey, and their bodies were tough enough to soften any hits. Denoso told Jean to bait the larvae into spitting their acid so they could then take them out. Jean followed the plan, baiting and then whacking a larva. Denzo grumbled about Jean using the stick for everything, but Jean was happy he took the creature out before it could spray its acid. The others pointed out the stick was a powerful new weapon, but that it was harder to take apart the larvae when they still had acid in their bodies. Jean got the strategy. Bait the acid attack, then take him down. A huge worm monster appeared, and Jean's stick broke as he defended himself, and he cried out as Denzo yelled at him to use his sword. Tina, holding a lantern, saw something huge in the darkness and screamed. A giant rat as big as a bear came out, and Jean was blown away by its size. Denzo called him an idiot, saying that the creature was obviously not normal. He identified it as a tri-horned monster and drew his sword. Denzo charged at the giant rat monster. He took the creature down in a flash, totally living up to his title as the Wolf King, and mentioned how there had been a lot more strong monsters lately. Shiva watched as he stood over the defeated monster. The kids made sure the coast was clear, and Denoso said it was time to carve up the monster. Taking the huge creature apart was gonna be tough, and Tina asked if they were almost done. Jean noticed Tina looked worried, and asked her what was wrong. Tina looked down a dark mineshaft, asking where her mom and dad had gone.